Anime autopsy here, and we need to have a conversation about the One Piece itself, because I am genuinely convinced that most of the community is hyped for an ending that does not actually exist. You keep talking about the treasure at the end of the Grand Line as if it's a finished product sitting on a shelf, waiting for Luffy to walk in, grab the box, roll credits. And listen to me. If that's your mental image, you are setting yourself up to miss the real payoff Oda has been planning for decades. Here's the thing. Every big One Piece debate I see falls into the same three categories. Is the One Piece just friendship? Is it just a mountain of gold and booze? Or is it some giant ancient weapon or world-ending device? And on the surface, this is fine. This is normal fandom behavior. But all three of those options quietly assume the same premise, that the treasure is already complete before Luffy ever sets foot on Laugh Tale. That his job is to open the box and go wow neat, not to do anything that fundamentally changes what that treasure even is. I need you to notice how lazy that is as a reading of this story. Not because you're lazy as a person, but because treating the One Piece as a passive object to be discovered ignores hundreds of chapters of very loud, very intentional setup about timing, inherited will, and unfinished promises. Roger literally tells Rayleigh they arrived too early. Joy Boy leaves an apology to Fishman Island for a promise he failed to keep. The Poneglyphs don't form a cute trivia puzzle. They form an incomplete history that only matters if someone in the present acts on it. When you say, it's just gold, or it's just a big cannon, you're turning Oda's endgame into a museum exhibit. Static, archived, sealed in amber since the Void Century. But this author has spent 25 years hammering the idea that dreams move forward through people who weren't there when the promise was made. That's not background flavor text, that's structural foreshadowing for what the One Piece actually is allowed to be, and I say this with love. I say this as someone who has spent an embarrassing amount of adult life rereading panels, cross-referencing SBS answers, and arguing with strangers on the internet about a fictional pile of treasure instead of, touching grass or filing my taxes on time. My brain is a pattern-seeking monkey that sees Joy Boy in every sun symbol. This is not a sin. But if we're going to obsess this hard, we at least need to be precise about what story Oda is actually writing. So here's the question I want hanging over this entire video. What if Luffy never truly finds the One Piece in the way the fandom keeps imagining? What if his real role is to finish it, to activate it, to add the missing piece that finally makes Roger's laughter, Joy Boy's apology, and the dawn of the world all snap into one intentional payoff for the first time in history? The problem with how we talk about treasure in One Piece. So here's the problem we need to drag into the sunlight. Most of the community still talks about the One Piece with this mental image of a final loot room. Luffy walks into Laugh Tale, opens the big door, there's a chest, there's a switch, there's a glowing MacGuffin, boom, cut to credits. Roll the We Are remix. Everyone cries. We log off and argue about power scaling. That's the default headcanon. And on paper, this is fine. This is normal. Stories end in vaults all the time. Except here's the thing. That model does not fit Oda as an author at all. Look at his track record with endings and payoffs. Arlong Park does not end with Nami getting a pile of money. It ends with her getting her map and her freedom back. Skypiea does not end with the Straw Hats hauling gold. It ends with Luffy punching a god and ringing a bell for a man who died centuries earlier. Dressrosa is not we stole the Smile Factory. It is we dismantled an entire system of abuse on the way out. The treasure is never just the object. The treasure is the change. Now slam that pattern against the static loot room model and watch it crack. Because canon is screaming that whatever is on Laugh Tale is not ready yet. Roger explicitly says they were too early. Not too weak, not too stupid, too early. The story keeps hammering this language of the dawn of the world, of an era that has to arrive before the final payoff can land. If the One Piece were just a finished chest of gold waiting on a pedestal, what does too early even mean? You were there. Open the box, Pirate Man. And it gets worse. The Poneglyphs themselves are an incomplete history. Robin's entire arc is about assembling fragments, about the fact that the world government shattered one continuous story into scattered stones. Joy Boy's apology to Fishman Island is literally a promise that was not fulfilled. The ancient weapons are tools that have not been used for their intended purpose. Everything about the endgame is foreshadowed as unfinished business, not sealed loot. Here's the irony that makes me feel like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Fans already understand this on the micro level. You accept that Nami's treasure is her map and her village. You accept that Robin's treasure is the true history. You accept that in Skypiea, the real payoff is the bell ringing through the sky, not the gold they quietly steal off-screen. And then the second we zoom out to the final island, a bunch of people in the community slam the emergency brakes and go, No, this one is just a chest. This one is Zelda. I need you to see the emotional stakes here. If we cling to that static model, we are perfectly positioned to misread the ending and then accuse Oda of changing everything at the last second, when in reality, he will have done exactly what he has been telegraphing since Chapter 1. Treasure as action, treasure as completion, treasure as a promise finally kept. We will be yelling retcon at something that was planned. So to fix this, we're going to steal my own foreshadowing / retrofitting / pre-writing framework and weaponize it on the One Piece itself. Not just on plot twists or character reveals, but on the treasure as a written object. Is the One Piece foreshadowed, retrofitted, or pre-written as something Luffy finds, or something he finishes? That's the category problem we're solving next. Yes, this is a 2-hour video. No, I'm not sorry. So yes, you read the timestamp correctly. This is a 2-hour video about a fictional treasure that may or may not be a glorified group project. And no, I'm not sorry. I need you to understand. One Piece is a 1,000+ chapter mystery written over nearly 30 years. You do not crack that open with a 10-minute TikTok and a screenshot of Roger laughing. Here's the thing. Every time the community argues about what the One Piece is, we end up in this mushy soup of vibes and memes because we haven't even agreed on the verbs. Are we talking about Luffy finding a finished object or Luffy completing an unfinished one? Those are different categories of storytelling. Those are different kinds of payoffs. If we don't lock that down, every theory is just a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Joy Boy in toast. So let me state the thesis cleanly, on the record, so you can decide right now if you're in for the full ride. Luffy will not simply stumble onto a pre-packaged treasure. Open the lid, roll credits. Everyone goes home. The story has been foreshadowing for years that the One Piece is something incomplete that needs him, something he has to activate, finish, or transform into what it was always meant to be. Roger didn't fail to get it. Roger arrived too early to complete it. To prove that, we're not just throwing headcanon at a wall and calling it analysis. We're going to build a framework first. What counts as setup versus payoff versus an unfinished promise? When Joy Boy apologizes to Fishman Island, is that a reveal? Or is that Oda deliberately leaving a time bomb for Luffy? When Roger reads the Poneglyphs and laughs at Laughtail, is that an ending? Or is that a baton pass? We need to categorize these moments before we can argue about them. Then, once the framework's in place, we're walking through the actual story, arc by arc, with receipts. Skypiea's unfulfilled Nolan Calgara promise that only gets completed when Luffy rings the golden bell. Fishman Island's hanging promise about the surface and Poseidon. The Poneglyphs as an intentionally incomplete history that only becomes meaningful when someone gathers all of them and acts. These aren't random coincidences, they're structural rehearsals for what the One Piece itself is going to be. And yes, we're going all the way out to the final war and the dawn of the world. Because the question isn't just, what is the treasure? It's, what world does that treasure exist in? A pile of gold means nothing if the ancient weapons are still pointed at everyone's heads. A real physical reward, which Oda has promised, can still be something that only turns into the One Piece when Luffy and his crew remake the stage around it. This is going to be dense. This is going to be long. This is normal when you're dissecting a pre-written endgame, but I'm promising you receipts, panels, SBS answers, author quotes, structural parallels. By the end, you're either going to agree with me or you're going to have to argue with Oda's own pages. Next, we're defining our terms: treasure, ending, finding. If we don't fix those, the rest of the debate is already lost. 3 kinds of payoff. How stories actually finish their promises. So, before we argue about what the One Piece is, we need to argue about how stories even cash checks in the first place. Because if you and I don't agree on what a payoff actually is, we're just 2 pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in toast panels and calling it foreshadowing. Here's the thing. There are really 3 different ways an author can finish a promise. The community mashes them together and then yells on Twitter. I need you to separate them in your head. First category, classic foreshadowing. Textbook, Chekhov's gun. Foreshadowing in the strict literary sense is when an author intentionally plants information early with a specific payoff already in mind. You hang the gun on the wall in Act 1 because you know exactly who pulls the trigger in Act 3 and why. Not someone might shoot it. Not wouldn't it be cool if. Planned. Precise. The setup is a receipt for a purchase the author has already decided to make. Second category, retrofitting. Retrofitting is when an author takes some earlier detail that wasn't originally meant to be a big deal and later assigns new meaning to it. That random scar. Suddenly it's a cursed bloodline. That throwaway gag character. Secret mastermind. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long serialized stories survive when the outline catches fire. You improvise with leftovers. You open the fridge, see cold rice and half an onion, and go, congratulations, that's now fried rice with tragic backstory. Done well, it feels intentional in hindsight. Done badly, it feels like fan fiction of itself. Third category, and this is the one that actually explains One Piece. Pre-writing. Listen to me, because this is where fans get lost. Pre-writing is a long-term modular planning style where the author builds a toolbox before Chapter 1. Motifs, mysteries, rules of the world, core answers. They know the ending in broad strokes. They know the big reveals. But they don't lock every micro detail of how each payoff will visually appear. Instead, they serialize by pulling from that pantry. So, metaphor time. Foreshadowing is cooking from a fixed recipe. You bought ingredients for carbonara, you're making carbonara, end of story. Retrofitting is improvising with leftovers. Whatever's in the Tupperware becomes dinner and you pretend it was intentional. Pre-writing is stocking a pantry. You deliberately buy eggs, flour, sugar, butter because you know you're going to bake something, but you don't decide whether it's cookies or cake until the party is actually happening. The ingredients are planned. The final form is chosen later, but still honest to the pantry. Now, why does this matter for Luffy and the One Piece? Because Oda is almost certainly operating in that third category. He pre-wrote a pantry of ideas. Joy Boy, the Void Century, the Will of D, ancient weapons, the too early Roger era, the coming dawn. Those aren't random leftovers, they're prepped ingredients. And somewhere near the end, he's deciding the exact dish. How Luffy's journey, his freedom obsession, his inherited will literally finishes the treasure Roger couldn't. Next, we're opening that pantry. I'm going to show you how Joy Boy's failure, Roger's laughter, and Luffy's stupidity are 3 parts of the same recipe. Why perfect planning is a fairy tale, even for Oda. And here's where we need to kill a very comforting myth the community loves, the idea that Oda is a 4D chess god who had every single panel of One Piece nailed down in a binder before Chapter 1. I need you to hear this. That version of perfect planning does not survive contact with reality. Weekly manga is a meat grinder. You get around 15 to 20 pages, every 7 days, for decades. While managing editors, assistants, family, health, and an audience of millions refreshing for spoilers. You're drawing, revising, storyboarding, negotiating with Jump, and occasionally going to the hospital because your back decided it's done with this shonen nonsense. In that environment, the fantasy of a 1,000-chapter mystery scripted shot for shot from day one? That's not discipline. That's a hallucination. Here's the thing. Oda is insanely planned. But he's also on record saying he changes his mind. He's talked about characters who were supposed to die but didn't because fans loved them. Roles that expanded. Designs that shifted. Arcs that stretched or shrank. He's admitted he had to speed up the story. That certain islands moved. That some reveals got pulled forward or pushed back. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is what happens when a pre-written endgame collides with real-time publishing. So when fans say, the One Piece had to be a fixed object from 1997, otherwise the foreshadowing is fake, they're putting the treasure in the wrong storytelling category. The difference between I know the concept and I have every prop in the room catalogued is enormous. An author can intentionally plan. There is a real treasure. It's tied to Joy Boy. It connects to the Void Century. It will make Roger laugh. It will flip the world. And then spend 25 years discovering the exact shape of that treasure alongside the evolving cast, themes, and reader expectations. You can see this in how late-game elements reframe earlier ones. Oda absolutely pre-wrote the idea that Luffy is special. But Nika? Gear 5's cartoon physics? The way the global conversation around freedom, oppression, and inherited will has shifted over 2 decades. You cannot convince me every beat of that was frozen in amber in 1997, while he was still figuring out how long Alabasta should run. The concept was planned, the execution evolved, and that evolution actually makes the One Piece stronger, not weaker. Because Oda can now align the final form of the treasure with arcs that only crystallized after years of serialization. Luffy's identity as Nika, the full horror of the world government, the specific dreams of each Straw Hat, the scale of the coming dawn. The treasure doesn't have to be a rigid answer preserved in a museum. It can be a destination whose meaning depends on who finally reaches it and what they've become, which creates a much more interesting tension. If the exact form of the One Piece is flexible within a fixed concept, the real question stops being what object is it, and becomes what does Luffy have to do so that when he opens it, it matters. If the foreshadowing is pointing to a treasure that needs the right era, the right captain, the right world conditions to actually function, then we're not watching a scavenger hunt. We're watching a construction project. And once you see it that way, Roger's laughter, Joy Boy's failure, and the final war stop being background lore, they become the blueprint for what Luffy has to build at the end, and what might be missing from the treasure when he finally gets there. Right. Real foreshadowing 101. Guns, bells, and promises. So if Roger's journey is the blueprint, we need to talk about what a real blueprint even is. Not in the galaxy brain YouTube thumbnail sense. In the boring, technical craft sense that actual authors use when they're not busy being turned into memes by the community. Here's the thing. Strict foreshadowing has one non-negotiable rule. The author already knows the payoff. Not a vibe. Not, this might be cool later. A specific, planned endpoint. Foreshadowing in the classical sense is when you plant a detail early because you are steering toward a known scene, a known line, a known decision. The setup is a receipt for a purchase you've already made in your outline. So, simple example. Chapter 1. A nobody kid points at a sheer impossible cliff with a rusted bell on top. No one has ever reached it. He swears, "One day I'll ring that bell so loud the whole world knows I existed." The story moves on. We get pirates, politics, trauma, whatever. Final chapter. He's bloodied, half broken, climbing that same cliff in a storm, and he slams his fist into the bell. It rings. We cut to villagers across the world hearing the sound. That is not a coincidence. That is not retrofitting. That is an author who wrote the ending first and then reverse-engineered the promise. Now, listen to me, because this is where One Piece stops being mystical and starts being mechanical. Oda does this constantly for the big stuff. Shanks betting his arm on the new era is not a cool throwaway. It's a mission statement. Luffy declaring in Chapter 1 that he'll become Pirate King is not a quirky child boast. It is the bell on the cliff. And every time the story hammers home that his core value is freedom, freedom to sail, to choose, to laugh, to eat meat and punch gods. That's the author underlining the word on the final page. Most competent long-form authors work this way for major character goals and thematic beats. You pre-write the destination, then foreshadow it. This is normal. This is fine. You do not, however, usually pre-write every microscopic detail of your mystery box. You don't necessarily know in Draft 1 what exact engraving is on the underside of the secret treasure lid. You know the function, the emotional payload, the theme. The texture can stay flexible. Pattern interrupt. If you're feeling a tiny existential crisis about all the foreshadowing compilations you've ever watched, same. I'm the pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. I get it. So here's the problem we have to stare in the face. In One Piece, Luffy's dream and the idea of freedom are foreshadowed with sniper rifle precision. Shanks's sacrifice, the hat, the Pirate King declaration, the repeated speeches about the freest person on the sea, all of that fits the strict planned category. But the exact nature of the One Piece? We get hints, jokes, denials, Oda saying, it's something real, and almost no concrete specific setup. So what does that tell us? Which one is fixed in Oda's head, and which one is intentionally porous, designed to be completed in story by what Luffy actually does at the end? Hold that question, because the answer lives in bells, whales, and a certain golden city in the sky. Retrofitting, the dirty secret that isn't actually dirty. In other words, those bells, that whale, that golden city, they're all doing double duty. They're foreshadowing, sure, but they're also hiding the thing the community never wants to admit. Retrofitting is happening, and it's not the end of the world. So let's name it properly. Retrofitting is when an author goes back to an earlier, relatively neutral detail and later declares, actually, that was important all along, even if that deeper meaning wasn't fully planned at the time. Not coincidence, not pure accident. A conscious decision to upgrade old furniture instead of throwing it out and buying new. The panel was just a panel when it was drawn. 10 years later, it becomes a linchpin. Here's a clean, non-One Piece example so nobody starts a war in the comments. Imagine a goofy side character introduced for comic relief. They trip over doors. They spill soup on nobles. You laugh. You move on. 5 arcs later, the author reveals they're actually a secret royal in hiding. Suddenly, all those clumsy moments read as deliberate cover, a performance to avoid suspicion. Were those pratfalls originally mapped out as royal-level 4D chess? Probably not. But the author saw unused space in the draft and decided to build a palace on it. And you know what happens next? The fandom starts posting split panels, early gag on the left, crown reveal on the right, and everyone screams, genius foreshadowing. Because it feels good. It's satisfying in hindsight, so our pattern-seeking monkey brain that sees Jesus in toast insists it must have been intentional from day one. We want the author to be an omniscient mastermind. We want the story to have always known where it was going. Except, listen to me, this is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most long-running storytelling survives contact with reality. In a series running for decades, no human being is holding every micro detail in a perfect crystal lattice from chapter 1. So retrofitting becomes a survival strategy. You keep early material relevant, you tighten the tapestry. You turn what used to be dead air into signal. The difference is not planned versus unplanned, it's thrown away versus reclaimed. And this is where we need to stop being precious about One Piece. Oda absolutely pre-wrote the big pillars. Void Century, Will of D, Ancient Weapons, Laugh Tale existing at all? Those are not improv, but within that frame, some aspects of Joy Boy, some of Nika's exact mythology, even the precise function or condition of the One Piece itself, almost certainly live in the retrofit category. Details that were once flexible are now crystallized because the story has grown around them. This is fine. This is normal. It doesn't weaken the story. It actually strengthens the case that Luffy's era is meant to finish an evolving idea. If Joy Boy, Roger, and the treasure itself have been gradually sharpened over time, then the ending isn't about discovering a static object that's been waiting unchanged since Oda's first draft. It's about Luffy stepping into a role the narrative has been refining for 25 years and doing the one thing no retrofit can fake, acting in the present. Which raises the real question. What happens when a retrofit world finally collides with a protagonist who refuses to treat anything as finished? Pre-writing, the secret weapon behind Oda's long game. So when that unstoppable present-tense ball of chaos named Luffy slams into a world full of half-finished promises, we need a better tool than just screaming foreshadowing at every panel. This is where I'm going to cheat a little and hand you a new word. I'm calling it pre-writing. And listen to me, this is not a formal literary theory term. You cannot cite this in your thesis without your professor emailing you back with concern. This is a practical label for what Oda appears to do. He builds this dense scaffolding of rules, motifs, and mysteries way up front, but he does not micromanage every future line of dialogue and camera angle. Here's the thing. Pre-writing is not, I have a vague vibe for the ending. Pre-writing is, I know the Void Century matters. I know the ancient weapons exist. I know the will of D is inherited. I know the Poneglyphs form a single history, and those 4 pillars are non-negotiable. The author decides the categories of truth that cannot be broken. Then, inside that cage, he leaves himself room to decide exactly how those truths collide when we finally hit Laugh Tale. In practice, that means Oda doesn't pre-write, on this exact island, this exact character will push this exact red button. That's rigid foreshadowing. That's when fans start doing corkboard math on panel angles, and I turn into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Pre-writing sounds more like, at the right time, someone with this will, who has gathered this information, will trigger this system I already designed 20 years ago. The who and where can flex. The what and why are locked. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is normal for long serialization. It's just that Oda's version is weaponized. Think about the Poneglyphs, their existence, their function as a distributed hard drive for the Void Century that's pre-written. Whether Robin deciphers a specific stone on Zoo or 101st, that's flexible execution. And I need you to see how that applies to the treasure itself. The One Piece is almost certainly pre-written. Oda has said it's real, physical, not the friends we made along the way. So the constants were probably set early. It's on Laugh Tale. It's tied to Joy Boy's failure. It's connected to the ancient weapons and the true history. And it made Roger laugh because he was too early to use it. What's not fixed is the exact way Luffy's era interacts with that object and that information. So when the community asks, what is the One Piece? We keep treating it as a static noun. But under pre-writing, the more important question is, what does the One Piece do once someone with Luffy's will reaches it? The treasure is a loaded mechanism. It's an unfinished promise waiting for the right idiot to pull the pin. And that's the stage we need to set. Because in the next part, I'm going to walk you through how the Void Century, Joy Boy, and even Roger's too early line are all screaming the same thing. The One Piece isn't just found. It has to be completed. A safer battlefield. How another series faked perfect planning. So before you start sharpening your pitchfork over Joy Boy and the Void Century, I need you to step with me into a safer battlefield. Naruto. Because everything the community does to Oda, we already did to Kishimoto. Toby is the perfect case study. Mysterious masked man shows up, talks in goofy third person, throws around space-time hacks, claims to be Madara, and the entire fandom turns into a crime lab. Then the Obito reveal hits and suddenly the timeline is flooded with Kishimoto planned this from chapter 1 threads. You remember those posts, right? Side-by-side panels, red circles, arrows, the whole conspiracy board starter pack. Fans pointed at the mask design. One eye hole on the same side as Obito's surviving eye. They pointed at the speech patterns. Toby's weird casual tone early on. Then the sudden shift to serious once he drops the act, supposedly mirroring Obito's trauma. Kakashi parallels got dragged in as proof too, Kamue sharing the same dimension, the timing of Rin's death, the way Toby fixates on the fourth Hokage. Every scrap of coincidence got upgraded to 4D foreshadowing. Except, here's the thing, when you actually look at author statements and production context, the picture gets messier. Kishimoto has admitted in interviews that Toby's identity wobbled. At one point, Toby really was just supposed to be Madara. At another, the exact backstory and emotional motivation weren't fully nailed down. The editorial department is pushing for twists, the story is sprinting weekly, and suddenly, Obito rises to the top of the candidate list. A lot of those perfect hints were vague enough that he could retrofit them once he made the call. That spiral mask, great visual, easy to assign meaning later. The shared space-time jutsu? Initially just a cool power, then reverse-engineered into a Kakashi connection. The goofy persona, a flexible bit of characterization that could be written off as an act once the reveal needed more edge. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is normal serialized storytelling, where the author leaves themselves escape hatches and then pretends it was all intentional. And here's the important part. The Obito reveal can still hit emotionally. Kakashi's guilt, Naruto confronting a failed version of himself, the way Obito mirrors Naruto's "I'll never go back on my word," and then catastrophically does, that all lands. The payoff is huge, even if every early panel wasn't a meticulously planned Chekhov's gun. We need to separate this moved me from this was pre-written from day one. Those are different categories. Because listen to me, if we overcredit planning in Naruto, we are almost certainly doing the same thing with One Piece. We turn Oda into a time-traveling god, assume every cloud shape is intentional foreshadowing, and then we miss what he's actually doing with Luffy and the One Piece. And if you mislabel retrofits as pre-writing, you will completely misread what it means for Luffy to create the treasure at the end. So now that we've practiced on Naruto, let's go back to Laugh Tale and ask a much more dangerous question. What if the biggest hint about the One Piece was never a hint at all, but a fragment of an ending Oda already wrote? Back to One Piece. What Oda actually locked in early? So, back to Laugh Tale. If that hint was actually a fragment of an ending Oda already wrote, we need to ask, what did he lock in from day zero, and what is still flexible? Because not everything about the One Piece is up for debate. Some stuff is hard-coded. Start at the most obvious pillar, the title. You don't call your manga One Piece unless you've already decided there is a singular capital T treasure conceptually unified at the end of the world. Not many pieces, not vibes. One Piece. Then Chapter 1 hits you with Roger's execution speech. In front of the entire world, he confirms there is a legendary treasure he left in that place. That's an author planting a flag, publicly, permanently. From that moment, Pirate King stops being a cool nickname and becomes a job description. Pirate King is defined as the man who found everything in this world, not the guy who had the most fun with his friends. The community loves to handwave this into metaphor, but listen to me. If the very definition of your endgame role is tied to a concrete achievement, that's a structural commitment. Oda can't walk that back in volume 110 and go, surprise, it was just personal growth. Then you add the geography. The Grand Line isn't random flavor text, it's a funnel. Reverse Mountain, the log poses, the fact that every route converges on one final island. That's Chekhov's map. You don't build a planetary racetrack that literally points at a finish line unless you've already decided there is something sitting there when someone finally arrives. Here's the thing. This is where the "it was the journey all along" crowd runs into a wall. Oda himself has said repeatedly that the One Piece is real, not metaphorical, not the friends we made. He has literally told fans, in print, that it is not that. When the author explicitly slams the door on a category of twist, You don't get to reopen it because your inner pattern-seeking monkey wants to see Jesus in the Going Merry's figurehead. Now, layer in the deeper lore that shows up shockingly early. The Void Century is mentioned in Alabaster. The Poneglyphs appear as indestructible history hard drives. The ancient weapons are framed as world-shaking devices tied to that erased era. This is not a sin. This is not random world building. This is Oda stapling the treasure to history and geopolitics. The message is clear. Whatever's at Laughtale is entangled with the true world map and the blank 100 years, not just a mountain of gold. So by the time you're, a few dozen volumes in, several things are non-negotiable. The One Piece is singular, physical, and historically important. It sits at a fixed point on the map. It is connected to the lost century and the structure of the world government. All of that is planned. All of that is intentional. But notice what none of that proves. Whether the treasure as it currently exists is finished. And that's the pivot. If the One Piece is real and physical, but even Roger says he came too early, then something is missing. The board is set. The pieces are on the table. So who's supposed to supply that last piece? And what does it mean if the final creator of the One Piece isn't Joy Boy or Roger, but Luffy himself? Roger's laugh. The first clue. The story isn't finished. Yet so we need to talk about that laugh, because if you really believe Roger got to Laughtale, saw a finished trophy on a pedestal, and just went, ha ha, neat, and peaced out, then I need you to actually think about what the story shows you. The Roger pirates reach the end of the Grand Line. They read every poneglyph. They piece together the Void Century. They uncover the ancient weapons. They find Joy Boy's apology, and then they see it, the treasure in one piece. And what happens? The Pirate King, the most dangerous man in the world, drops to his knees and wheezes laughing. The whole crew is in tears. Not from despair, from the sheer absurdity of Joy Boy's story and the current state of the world. Here's the thing. That reaction is your first clue the story is not finished yet. Roger doesn't say, "We did it, boys, roll credits." He says explicitly, "We arrived too early." Too early for what? Too early for a static pile of gold? No. Too early for the plan that treasure represents to actually work. If the One Piece were a completed static treasure, this is a non-problem. You don't arrive too early to a finished chest. You just take it. You cash it in. You topple the world government tomorrow. The whole too early line makes zero sense if what he found was already doing its job by existing. Roger's choice to leave it there and leave it to the next era is not cowardice. It's category clarification. He is telling you what this thing is. It's not a prize, it's a trigger. It's time-sensitive and action-dependent. The author is waving a giant neon sign that says, "This treasure only matters when the right person, in the right world, pushes the button." So what did Roger actually find? Not a finished product. An incomplete promise. A complete history, sure. Knowledge, tools, and a plan. But a plan that requires conditions he cannot create. A world on the brink of dawn, ancient weapons in play, oppressed peoples ready to move, and a Joy Boy who isn't dying of incurable disease in a pre-Whitebeard war status quo. Listen to me. This is foreshadowing of function, not just object. Oda is telling you that the One Piece is a blueprint. Joy Boy drew it, Roger read it, Luffy has to build it. That's the difference between finding and creating the treasure. Roger's laughter then isn't just, ha-ha, it was a prank bro. It's the exhausted, hysterical laugh of a man who finally reads the finished blueprint for a house and realizes he is chronically, physically incapable of lifting a hammer. The absurdity is that the instructions are perfect, the dream is perfect, the timing is wrong. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, Oda pre-writing the endgame and then forcing you to watch an entire generation show up one chapter too early. And the punchline. If Roger laughed at seeing the blueprint, what happens when someone finally starts building? Inherited will. Joy Boy, to Roger to Luffy, as a chain of failure and completion. So when Roger laughs at the blueprint, we need to ask, whose blueprint is it, and whose job is it to actually build? Because buried under that punchline is a chain of people failing upwards across centuries. Start with Joy Boy, the giant apology. Poneglyph in Fishman Island is not just a sad post-it note from history. It's a receipt for a broken promise. He promised the people of the sea a future on the surface, tied to Noah, tied to the ancient weapons, tied to this massive coordinated migration that never happened. The Ark is sitting there. Poseidon is reborn. The red line is still in the way. The author is screaming that the pieces exist, the timing doesn't. Here's the thing. Joy Boy clearly reached the knowledge part. He knew the weapons, he knew the plan, he carved it into indestructible stone. He had the instructions, he could not execute. Whether that's because the world government crushed him, the era lacked allies, or the conditions weren't met yet, the result is the same. A literal monument to an unfinished task. Fast forward to Roger. He finally reads the whole script. The Void Century, Joy Boy, the weapons, the dawn. He gets to Laugh Tale, sees the completed history, and what does he say? We arrived too early. Exact same category of problem. Joy Boy was too early to fulfill the promise. Roger is too early to restart it. They both hit the ceiling of their own era and then punt the ball downfield. And this is where I need you to stop thinking of Luffy as just the next pirate king and start seeing him as the third link in a planned relay. Roger isn't waiting for some random kid. He's explicitly waiting for the one who will become Joy Boy. The story hammers that home. Kaido asks if Luffy is Joy Boy. Zunisha hears the drums and says, Joy Boy has returned. The community has been cooking theories on this for years. Luffy's job is not to redo Roger's journey. His job is to finish Joy Boy's and Roger's unfinished work with the one ingredient they didn't have, the right era. And if you think this inherited will as unfinished promise thing is me being a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, Oda has been running smaller-scale simulations of this pattern since Jaya. Noland and Kalgra fail to reunite. Centuries later, Luffy rings the golden bell and completes the promise for them. Tom dreams of the sea train. Frankie literally builds it and carries his will forward. Odin can't open Wano. Momo and the Scabbards, with Luffy's help, finish that job. Different arcs, same storytelling category. Someone in the future cashes a check the past couldn't. Listen to me. That's not random. That's intentional pre-writing of the Joy Boy to Roger to Luffy chain. The treasure in all these cases is not an object, it's the completed promise. So when Oda swears the One Piece is real and physical, that doesn't mean it's already complete. It means there is something on that island that only becomes the One Piece when Luffy's era uses it to finally execute Joy Boy's plan, the weapons, Noah, the fall of the Red Line, the dawn. The treasure isn't just what's there, it's what gets done with it, which raises a much dumber, much scarier question. If the One Piece is a multi-generational construction project, what exactly is Luffy supposed to build? What even is treasure in One Piece? Spoiler, it's not just gold. So before we answer that, we need to fix a much more basic error in the way the community talks about this story. What even is treasure in One Piece? Because if your brain still auto-completes that word to gold coins in a chest, you are reading a completely different manga than the one Oda is actually writing. Here's the thing. Oda has spent 1,000 chapters running a quiet re-education program on you. Treasure in this story is never just the shiny object. It's the purpose, the relationships, the action that turns an object into a promise. Take Nami. On paper, her treasure is maps, tangerines, a pile of berries she's hoarding from pirates. Except the second you zoom out, it's obvious. Her real treasure is Kokoyashi village and the dream of drawing a map of the entire world so her people can live under the sky they choose. The money is just the tool. The treasure is the freedom it buys. Robin. Her gold is illegal rocks with unreadable squiggles on them. Zero market value. Maximum narrative value. Those poneglyphs only become treasure when someone can read them and then do something with that history. Until Robin shows up, they're just ancient paperweights. Once she joins, they're literally the key to the world's liberation. Chopper's treasure is medicine. Frankie's is ships. But again, pay attention to the category here. A drug in a bottle is nothing until it saves a life. A ship in a dock is lumber until it carries dreams across the sea. The Going Merry is a perfect example. Materially, it's trash by Water 7. Sentimentally, it's priceless. But the real treasure moment isn't the ship itself. It's the Viking funeral, the goodbye, the acknowledgement that this object fulfilled its purpose. Now contrast all of that with Luffy's relationship to conventional loot. Skypiea literally drops a mountain of gold at his feet. Thriller Bark has enough treasure to fund 10 pirate crews. Luffy does not care. He will punt a national economy into the ocean if it means he gets to punch a god, ring a bell, or save a friend. And that Skypiea bell is the cleanest foreshadowing of Oda's treasure logic. The bell is metal. The gold is metal. But when Luffy punches an L and rings that thing so it echoes down to Jaya, suddenly it's not gold. It's a message that completes Noland and Kalgara's centuries-old promise. Same object, different action. Completely different category of value. Listen to me. Oda is an intentional author. He is not doing this by accident. Over and over, he shows you treasure that only becomes meaningful when someone activates it in the right context. The bell, the logs, the ships, even the straw hats themselves are treasures that only matter because they move, fight, choose. So when Oda tells fans, yes, the One Piece is real, it's a physical treasure, that doesn't actually settle the problem. It just tells you the substrate. The question is, what action turns that object into the One Piece? I need you to hold this in your head because it's the bridge to the endgame. If every important treasure in this story becomes treasure through use, through fulfilled promises, then whatever is on Laugh Tale is not the punchline, it's the setup. Luffy's era is the payoff, which means the real twist isn't what is the One Piece, it's what has to be done with it. And that's where Joy Boy, the ancient weapons, and the Dawn stop being lore dumps and start being instructions. Skypiea, the prototype for finishing someone else's story. And if that sounds abstract, I need you to remember the one arc everyone insists is filler but in the manga. Skypiea is Oda grabbing your head, pointing at a cloud island and going, "This is the prototype. This is the manual for how you finish someone else's story and turn an old object into new treasure." Quick recap so we're on the same page. 400 years ago, you have Noland the Explorer and Kalgra the Shandian Warrior. They go from enemies to best friends, they cure an illness, they stop a sacrifice, they share a meal. They promise, "We'll ring the bell so you can always find us." And then the island gets yeeted into the sky, Noland shows up to an empty shore, and the world spends centuries calling him a fraud. One broken promise, and an entire community's history gets rewritten as a joke. Here's the thing, the golden bell never moves. It's always there. It's objectively valuable, giant, made of gold. All the stuff fans joke the One Piece has to be. But it doesn't function as treasure in the story until Luffy punches a lightning god through it, until he rings it so hard the sound crosses an ocean and tells Mont Blanc cricket, "Your ancestor wasn't lying." The bell is retroactively transformed from shiny background prop into proof, into absolution, into the completion of a 400-year-old sentence. That's not just good payoff. That is Oda running a controlled experiment. Treasure as a dormant symbol that needs the right idiot in a straw hat to activate it. Now put that next to Joy Boy, another ancient figure, another persecuted people. Fishman Island sitting under the sea with a massive object tied to a promise. Noah. We're told Joy Boy tried to bring the fishmen to the surface and failed. He leaves an apology on a Poneglyph and a literal ark parked in the middle of their city, and then nothing. Centuries of waiting. Centuries of being called dangerous, inferior monsters. Sound familiar? Noah is the golden bell, scaled up to apocalyptic size. It's always been there. It's visibly important. But it has no completed meaning yet. The author has very intentionally parked a Chekhov's ark under the ocean and told you, someone in the future era has to ring this bell, has to move this ship, has to finish this story. Skypiea is not a random detour. It's a test run for the One Piece's entire storytelling category, a planned demonstration that an object can be treasure in waiting, that its value is contingent on a future act that was decided long before the protagonist was born. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is pre-writing in action. In Skypiea, Luffy doesn't discover a chest and cash out. He doesn't even care about the gold. He completes Noland and Calgara's narrative circuit. He turns their failed promise into a finished one. And that completion is the treasure. Listen to me. That is exactly the role he's being set up to play for Joy Boy, for Noah, and for whatever is sitting on Laugh-Tale. And once you see that, we need to talk about why Roger laughed, why he said he was too early, and what it means for an entire crew to reach the end of the world and realize the punchline isn't ready yet. Fishman Island, Joy Boy's unpaid debt, and Luffy's IOU. So when Roger says he was too early, Fishman Island is your tutorial level for what that actually means. Joy Boy got to the loading screen of the promised world and then had to hit quit game, leaving behind the saddest apology letter in the ocean. That Poneglyph isn't vague. It's an explicit textual IOU. Joy Boy promised something to Fishman Island involving Noah, involving Poseidon, involving a future where the people of the sea don't have to cower under 10,000 meters of water. And he failed. The author doesn't frame it as a mystery box. It's framed as unfinished business. Here's the thing. Oda then immediately hands you all the pieces. Noah, this absurdly huge arc, sitting in the middle of the island. Shirahoshi revealed as Poseidon, an ancient weapon who can command sea kings. And a prophecy that one day, Fishman Island will move to the surface. It's not solved. It's staged. The difference matters. Now add Madame Shiali. She predicts Luffy will destroy Fishman Island, and the community has been arguing about that panel ever since. Is it literal? Is Luffy going to nuke the place? Or is it metaphorical? Some poetic, destroy the idea of Fishman Island thing? Fans screenshot that scene the way a pattern-seeking monkey sees Jesus in Toast and go, foreshadowing, without asking what category of setup this actually is. Listen to me. Oda already showed you the answer in the same arc. Luffy doesn't want to annihilate Fishman Island. He wants to free it. So the most coherent reading is a synthesis. Luffy destroys Fishman Island as it currently exists by making it unnecessary. By using Noah and Poseidon to haul the entire community to the surface, he literally dismantles the island's role as an underwater refuge born from oppression. In other words, he finishes Joy Boy's job. The apology was the failed patch notes. Luffy is the update actually shipping. That's not a guy who stumbles onto an ancient secret and leaves it in a glass case. That's an agent of completion. The storytelling pattern here is intentional. Joy Boy starts the promise, history interrupts, and a future pirate with a rubber brain and zero impulse control shows up to pay the debt with interest. And we need to sit with how on the nose that is. If Fishman Island is the local version of an unfinished promise, what do you think Laugh-Tale is? What do you think the One Piece is? Joy Boy's apology is one region-locked IOU. The treasure at the end of the world is the global version of the same problem. A plan that was too early, a punchline that needed a different era, a different pirate to actually land. Which means when Luffy reaches that island, he's not just opening a chest. He's walking into the biggest unpaid bill in history. And the question is, what does he have that Joy Boy and Roger didn't? Why Roger didn't use the One Piece, even though he found it? What he has is the answer to the Roger problem. Because listen to me, if Gold D. Roger already reached the final island, already read the Poneglyphs, already knew the truth, why didn't he just pull the trigger? Why didn't he topple the world government, awaken the dawn, roll credits, thanks for watching? On paper, it sounds simple. In practice, it's a disaster checklist. Roger is terminally ill. His crew is emotionally done. Poseidon, the ancient weapon that literally talks to sea kings, isn't even born yet. The allied forces that the final war needs are scattered, oppressed, or still arguing about who gets to sit at the grown-up table. You don't start a world revolution with a dying captain, no mermaid queen, and zero global coordination. You start that. You get a tragic one-season spin-off that gets cancelled. And Oda tells you this in canon. Roger stands on Laugh Tale, sees Joy Boy's failure, sees the completed history, and what does he say? We were too early. That's not a vibes-based excuse, that's a logistical diagnosis. The author is waving a neon sign saying, the conditions are wrong. Here's the thing. Our community keeps treating the One Piece as a chest, a static object. You open it, boom, world changes. But the story keeps framing it as a system, a blueprint, a set of tools and knowledge that only turns into a revolution when you plug in the right people at the right time. The Poneglyphs are history, yes, but history is useless trivia until someone with power, allies, and opportunity acts on it. Example: Joy Boy. He had an ancient weapon on his side and still failed to bring Fishman Island to the surface. Roger has the full story and still walks away. That's two separate eras hitting the same brick wall. The problem is not information. The problem is capacity. So Roger makes a different move. He weaponizes time. If he can't fire the gun, he can at least load it and throw it into the future. He turns his own execution into marketing for piracy. He spreads the idea of the One Piece as the ultimate treasure, kicks off the Great Pirate Era, and basically crowdsources the search for the missing pieces he never had. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is the author showing you intentional, long-range storytelling. Pattern interrupt. Roger's inaction is the action. The most dangerous thing he does is nothing. He leaves the One Piece untouched, not because it's useless, but because it's too loaded for a half-baked era. A gun that powerful, fired too early, just ricochets and kills the wrong people, which means the treasure is contingent by design. It needs Poseidon awake. It needs a global pirate culture. It needs a straw hat crew that has literally befriended every oppressed corner of the map. And it needs one idiot rubber man whose definition of treasure is freedom, not ownership. I need you to see the category difference here. Roger doesn't fail to use the One Piece. He refuses to. He leaves it as a world-sized Chekhov's gun that cannot go off until the era itself changes. Which is why, when Luffy finally reaches that island, he's not finding the One Piece in a finished state. He's completing its function. And that raises the next problem. What does it actually look like when someone pulls that trigger on purpose? The Poneglyphs, an incomplete history, waiting for an author. So when I say pull the trigger, I'm not talking about some big red button on Laugh Tale. I'm talking about a world-sized Rube Goldberg machine that's been frozen mid-motion for 800 years. And the key pieces of that machine are already out there, sitting in plain sight, carved into indestructible blue bricks the size of trucks. The Poneglyphs are Oda's most aggressive flex in long-term storytelling. They're not lore dumps, they're save files. Scattered across the world, each one holds a different category of information. A fragment of the void century, a warning about an ancient weapon, or a coordinate in the route to Laugh Tale. You do not get the story by reading one. You barely get a teaser trailer. Here's the thing. Even the one person in the entire narrative who can read them cannot do anything with them alone. Robin is the perfect example of why information is not power. Information plus an authorial will is power. She spends her whole childhood chasing these stones, finally decodes them, and what happens? Every government on Earth decides she's a walking war crime. She needs a ship, a crew, and a captain insane enough to say, yeah, sure, let's uncover the world's biggest war secret and then punch it. Foreshadowing-wise, Oda is screaming at you here. He builds a character who can literally read history, then makes it crystal clear that reading isn't enough. Interpretation plus action is the missing step. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how most revolutions work. Some nerd in a library figures out the problem. Some idiot with charisma decides to actually do something about it. I need you to think of the Poneglyphs as chapters of a book where someone tore out the last 20 pages and mailed the rest to random addresses. You have the introduction. You have the middle. You even have Joy Boy's apology letter to Fishman Island just sitting there. But you don't have the conclusion where the plan actually happens. The information exists. It's just not a complete, actionable narrative until someone collects, orders, and emotionally commits to it. And that's where the One Piece stops being a chest and starts being a final chapter. The most consistent reading is that the treasure is the culmination of this assembled history. A mechanism, a plan, a final joke that only lands once you've reconstructed the entire book. Roger reaches Laugh Tale, sees the last chapter, and laughs because he's reading the punchline without having lived the setup. Too early, wrong era, wrong author. Which is where Luffy and the Straw Hats walk in, pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in every stone tablet and decide to make it real. They are not just readers of history, they are the ones who will compile it, interpret it, and then weaponize it against the status quo. We need to stop treating them as tourists on a lore safari and start seeing them as co-authors, finishing Joy Boy's draft and Roger's margin notes. Listen to me. When that crew finally reaches Laugh Tale, they're not discovering a perfectly wrapped treasure. They're bringing the only missing ingredient that has ever mattered in this story, a generation willing to press publish on the world's most dangerous manuscript. And the next question is ugly. What happens to a regime built on erased pages when the book finally hits print? Luffy's dream, the missing line. We're not supposed to hear yet. So when that book finally hits print, we run into the one page Oda keeps slapping a sticky note over. Luffy's real dream. We need to talk about the missing line, because the series goes out of its way to show you everyone's reaction to it, and then hard cuts your audio. With Sabo and Ace as kids, you see their faces go from confusion to stunned awe. With the current crew on the Sunny, you get Nami's exasperated, "That's impossible," Frankie bawling, Usopp losing his mind, Robin quietly smiling. You get the emotional waveform. You never get the words. And here's the thing. We know Pirate King is not the censored dream. Luffy says it himself. Becoming Pirate King is the step. It's the job title he needs on his resume to even be eligible for the actual wish. That's already a different category of goal. One is a destination. The other is what he wants to do to the world once he's standing there. Fans go full pattern-seeking monkey on this, seeing Jesus in every panel of Toast. It's a global party. It's a feast with the whole world. It's making everyone free so they can laugh. These aren't random. They're pulling from real scaffolding. Roger's crew reaching Laugh Tale, reading the full history, and then just bursting out laughing. The island is literally called Laugh Tale. Joy Boy is framed as a guy whose failure is tragic because his promise was joyous. Gear 5 turns Luffy into a walking gag reel. The foreshadowing keeps tying the end of the sea to shared, contagious laughter. So no, I don't think the dream is find treasure or own the seas. That's too small, too material, too easy to check off. The reactions make more sense if what he says is absurdly large and absurdly simple. Some act that forces the entire world to experience freedom at the same time. A party, a feast, a stunt that uses the ancient weapons and the completed history not to nuke the map, but to drop the walls and make oppression structurally impossible. Listen to me. Whatever the exact wording is, it's aimed past Raftel. It's aimed at the day after. It's not reach the end of the story. It's rewrite what the end even means for everyone still stuck in Chapter 1. That's why Oda can hide the line and still write toward it for 30 years. The content is secret. The function is not. And that function is the creative act. The One Piece, as Roger found it, is dormant. It's a manuscript, a blueprint, a punchline with no audience. Luffy's dream is the condition that turns that static treasure into a realized vision. He's not just the guy who finds the chest, he's the one who spends it. Which raises a much more dangerous question. If Luffy's dream requires the entire world to participate, what happens to the people whose power depends on nobody ever hearing the joke? Laugh Tale. A punchline that needs a final joke. It's not an accident that the question is, what happens when everyone hears the joke? And the final island is literally called Laugh Tale, not Truth Island, not Final Destination 6. Laugh Tale. The name itself is Oda standing on a table yelling at you. This isn't just a location, it's a story with a punchline. And here's the thing. For years the community called it Raftel, because that's what the early Romanizations gave us. It sounded mysterious, foreign, whatever. Then Oda steps in and clarifies, no, it's Laugh Tale. That's not a translation tweak. That's the author walking over to the foreshadowing category and slapping a giant neon sticker on it that says, this is a joke-structured island. The island is a narrative device. It's a written gag waiting for a final callback. So when Roger gets there and just starts cackling, that's not random pirate banter. That's a reader reaction written into the world. He sees the completed history, Joy Boy's apology, the ancient weapons, the world government scam, and his response is to laugh. Not because it's shallowly funny, but because it's absurd, tragic, cosmically stupid. You know that laugh you do when your life falls apart and your brain goes, sure, of course this is happening? That. The crew's reaction matters too. They don't weep in reverent silence. They laugh with him. They are in on the joke. They're recognizing that Joy Boy had a plan, that the world was supposed to be something else, and that history got interrupted mid-punchline. Roger explicitly says they came too early. Translation, we got the setup, we got the premise, but the closer hasn't gone on stage yet. Which is where the One Piece stops being a big treasure chest and starts being part of the joke's construction. The treasure has meaning, sure, but the full joke only lands when somebody actually does what Joy Boy intended. Until then, it's an unfinished bit. It's the gun on the mantelpiece with no Act 3. It's a manuscript, not a performance. Oda has said the One Piece is real and physical. He has never said it's already complete as a story beat. Listen to me. Luffy is not just the guy who stumbles into the punchline. He is the punchline. He's freedom, he's laughter, and now he is literally Nika, a sun god whose job description is make people smile while breaking their chains. In storytelling terms, that's not subtle. That's the author grabbing you by the collar. Luffy is thematically engineered to hear Joy Boy's failed joke and then improv the ending Joy Boy couldn't reach. And we need to underline this. Laugh Tale is not a finish line. It's the setup for the last act. When Luffy gets there, he's not done. He's been handed the full script. The moment that matters is what he decides to do after he reads it. How he weaponizes that truth against a world government built on nobody ever hearing the story. Which raises a different problem. What happens when your final joke requires a global audience that's been trained for 800 years not to laugh? The dawn of the world. Why timing matters more than location. So here's the uncomfortable answer to that. If your final joke needs a global audience, then where you tell it matters way less than when you tell it. And One Piece has been screaming timing over location at you for years while we all argue about GPS coordinates. Listen to me. Oden doesn't die for a map. He dies for a calendar. In his journal, he doesn't say, someone will reach Laugh Tale again. He writes that in 20 years, the world's strongest will gather, that a war will split the seas, that a figure will appear to lead the world to the dawn. That's not cartography. That's scheduling. The author is literally foreshadowing that Roger's run was a dress rehearsal and Luffy's era is opening night. Pedro picks this up and runs with it straight into an explosion. His entire character is obsessed with the dawn of the world. He looks at Luffy and says, "You're the one who will lead us there." Not, "You're the guy who'll dig up the chest." The Mink tribe talks about the dawn with religious intensity. They shelter the road Poneglyph for centuries, waiting for the right pirate at the right moment with the right allies. If the One Piece were just a static pile of gold, this is a very weird way to hoard your retirement fund. Here's the thing. All of that too early language around Roger only makes sense if what's on Laugh Tale is dangerous when revealed under the wrong conditions. Roger literally says they arrived before the right time. Before the world was ready. Before the political order. the social consciousness. And yes, the awakened powers were in place to handle the Void Sentry's truth, without the planet immediately speed-running self-destruction. We need to sit with that, because it quietly nukes the treasurer's prize reading. A static reward doesn't care about era. Gold spends the same in 1524 and 2024. A joke that reboots the entire world order? That cares a lot about whether the ancient weapons are online, whether the Yonko stalemate has collapsed, whether a sun god with rubber bones and plot armor has rallied an actually global coalition. So Luffy's job is not reach Laugh Tale, roll credits. His job is reach Laugh Tale at the one moment in history where using what's there doesn't just plunge everything into chaos. That's why the story spends 1,000 chapters assembling a cast that is absurdly overqualified. A fishman who can speak for the sea, a princess weapon of mass destruction, a reformed warlord, a revolutionary dad, a Yonko alliance, and a rubberman whose very heartbeat is a drum circle about liberation. The central claim gets sharper here. The One Piece is a loaded mechanism, prepped by Joy Boy and Roger, intentionally delayed for centuries. Luffy's era isn't the first one to find the safety, it's the first one remotely responsible enough to pull the trigger. Which raises the next problem. If the treasure is a mechanism, what exactly is it built to do once Luffy finally fires it? Ancient weapons. Tools, not endings. So if the One Piece is a mechanism, we need to talk about the other giant machines sitting on the board, because Oda has already shown you the tutorial version. They're literally called ancient weapons, and the community still treats them like doomsday collectibles instead of what they actually are, tools waiting for a user. Here's the thing. Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus, every time they come up, the world government panics. We're told Pluton is a warship with absurd destructive power, enough to erase islands. Its blueprints sit in Water 7, tied to a specific place and a specific generation of shipwrights. Poseidon? That's Shirahoshi herself, a mermaid princess, born once in centuries, who can command sea kings. Uranus is still mostly off-screen, but it's framed as a sky or weather-related force the government is terrified of. These aren't vague myths. They're concrete, planned devices in the writing, each anchored to a person or location. And notice the pattern. None of them are born evil. The problem is never this weapon is cursed. The problem is always what happens if the wrong idiot gets the keys. Spandam wants Pluton to flex power. The celestial dragons want every ancient weapon locked away or monopolized. The moral category isn't in the object, it's in the user. This is not a sin in storytelling. This is normal. This is how an author keeps the tension on human choice instead of magic nukes. Poseidon is the most blatant example. Shirahoshi is introduced as shy, traumatized, and absolutely not ready to wield apocalyptic Sea King control. Her power is explicitly framed as something that must be guided by someone she trusts. Neptune says it. The Sea Kings say it. The story tells you out loud that this weapon's fate hinges on the heart of the person standing next to her. And who does she immediately trust, over and over? Luffy. The pattern-seeking monkey in my brain that sees Jesus in toast is screaming future alliance here. But this one is barely even foreshadowing. It's practically a scheduled appointment. So when Oda keeps hammering ancient weapons equals world-scale tools that need a user, I need you to make the obvious leap. What if the One Piece itself sits in the same category? Yes, Oda has said it's a real physical treasure. This is fine. That doesn't mean it's a finished, self-contained prize. It can be a gigantic world mechanism, something that, paired with Poseidon, Pluton, Uranus, and the full history of the Poneglyphs, can either lock the world into eternal oppression or crack it open into liberation. Which snaps us back to Luffy. His role isn't to passively discover a perfect treasure, it's to decide how these tools get used. Joy Boy failed to fulfill his promise to Fishman Island. Roger arrived too early and left the stage. Luffy is the first one with the freedom obsession, the allies, and the timing to actually fire the loaded mechanism in the right direction. In other words, he doesn't just find the One Piece, he completes its purpose. But if these are all just tools, what exactly is he building with them? The world government's fear, not the treasure, but its use. He's building the one thing the world government has been trying to dismantle for 800 years. And you can see that not from what they protect, but from what they burn. Look at their greatest hits reel. O'Hara doesn't get a slap on the wrist, it gets erased from the map. Not just the island, not just the scholars, but the books, the records, the entire intellectual hard drive of a civilization. They hunt down archaeologists as if can read old rocks is a more dangerous power than the Gura Gura no Mi. They censor history so aggressively that even saying void century feels illegal. And any time an ancient weapon peeks its head out of the ground, their first instinct is not, how do we store this safely? It's, how do we control it? Or nuke the evidence? Here's the thing. If the One Piece were just a chest, you'd expect a different behavior pattern. You'd park 10 Buster Call fleets around Laugh-Tale, build a celestial laser fence, and call it a day. But they don't. They're not ring-fencing the island. They're ring-fencing the context. They're not preventing travel. They're preventing understanding. That's the foreshadowing nobody in the community wants to talk about, because it ruins the clean treasure hunt fantasy. The world government's terror is epistemological. The problem isn't that someone might physically reach the final island. The problem is that someone might reach it having read every Poneglyph, decoded the void century, and then decide to actually do something with that information. Pattern interrupt. Imagine an idiot. Specifically, imagine Luffy, the guy who forgets people's names, who falls asleep mid-exposition, who treats national coups as snack breaks. On paper, he is the least threatening historian on Earth, and yet the narrative keeps quietly pairing him with the one person who can reconstruct the forbidden story from scratch. Robin is literally the category of person the government genocided an island to erase. She is the last surviving problem from O'Hara, someone who can read the stones, track the ancient weapons, and reconstruct the true history in order. Luffy, on the other hand, is the worst possible wielder of that completed picture from the government's perspective, because he has zero interest in being controlled, managed, or negotiated with. He doesn't bargain, he doesn't compromise, he just breaks the system that annoys him. Put those together, and you don't get a passive treasure finder. You get an activation key plus a launch button. And listen to me. That is exactly what the elders are afraid of. Not a pirate king who discovers a museum exhibit, but a pirate king who treats the One Piece as a manual for how to rearrange the world. So the treasure's danger isn't static, it's catalytic. In Luffy's hands, whatever Roger found stops being an endpoint and becomes raw material. The One Piece isn't just something he uncovers. It's something he finishes, assembles, and weaponizes into a new era. And we need to talk about what that era actually looks like. Luffy the pattern breaker. How he treats every treasure he meets. And if that's true, then we need to talk about the guy who weaponizes treasure just by touching it. Because listen to me, Luffy does not behave like a traditional treasure hunter. He's not a dragon on a hoard. He's a raccoon who keeps dragging home cursed objects and accidentally purifying them. Over and over, the story shows you this. He walks into a place where value is broken, where treasure means power or control or trauma. And he walks out having rewritten the definition for everyone stuck there. Start with the obvious material stuff. Skypiea rains literal gold on the crew, and Luffy could not care less. He leaves Enel's ship, the bell, the ruins. His big move is ringing that bell for Noland and Kalgara's descendants. The wealth is background noise. The promise is the point. Same in Wano. Ancient weapons, samurai gold, a whole country's black market potential. Luffy's priority is feeding starving people, freeing slaves, decking Kaido, and giving Momonosuke the confidence to stand. The treasure he protects is their future, not their vault. This is a pattern. It's planned, not an accident of goofy writing. He ignores Thriller Bark's loot. He shrugs at Buggy's chest. He only gets possessive when the treasure is a person, a bond, or a dream. That straw hat is worth more than Skypiea's gold, and the story treats that as objective reality, not just quirky characterization. Here's the thing. Luffy doesn't just reject old treasure, he consecrates new treasure through action. When he plants that flag on drum and tells Wapol's goons that attacking it means declaring war, he turns a piece of cloth into a sacred object. When he risks his life to defend Merry's honor, he elevates a worn-out ship to the status of a crewmate. That's not sentimental filler. That is the author showing you that value in this story is created by commitment, not price. And then there's the destructive side of this power. Arlong's maps? Burned. Crocodile's sand-locked monopoly over Alabaster's rain and resources? Shattered. Doflamingo's stranglehold on Dressrosa's economy and the Smile pipeline? Torn out by the roots. Every time an oppressive system is built around treasure, land, weapons, labor, history, Luffy's narrative function is to break it, then leave the pieces for others to rebuild under a new definition. Foreshadowing-wise, that's huge. Because if your protagonist is a walking value reset button, what do you think happens when he reaches the biggest hoard in the story? He's not going to sit on the One Piece and charge admission. This is not a sin in the story's moral universe. This is normal for him. He will activate it. He will turn whatever Roger found into a shared treasure, the same way he turned a hat, a ship, and a flag into holy relics. And I need you to hold that in your head, because next we're going to zoom out from the gold and the flags and talk about the one treasure he's already been reshaping without even touching it. The Void Century's buried story itself. The Straw Hats as co-authors of the New World. So when I say Luffy is already reshaping the Void Century's buried story, I don't just mean in a poetic, friendship is the real treasure way. I mean in a very boring, logistical way. You cannot even reach, interpret, or weaponize what's at Laugh Tale without the specific weirdos on that ship. And I need you to actually sit with that. Because the community keeps treating the Straw Hats' dreams as side quests when they are literally the user manual for the One Piece. Start with the obvious stuff. Nami wants a map of the entire world. Zoro wants to be the greatest swordsman. Usopp wants to become a brave warrior of the sea. Sanji is chasing the All Blue. Chopper wants to cure any disease. Robin wants to uncover the true history. Frankie wants to build the dream ship that sails to the end. Brook wants to reunite with Laboon. Jinbei wants equality between humans and fishmen. On paper, these look disconnected, a grab bag of shonen wish lists. In practice, every single one is a demand for a restructured world. Here's the thing, you can't have Nami's map unless the seas are actually mappable, unless the Grand Line stops being a government-maintained nightmare maze. You can't have Sanji's All Blue unless the oceans are allowed to mix, which probably means ancient weapons, Red Line destruction, all that fun apocalypse-adjacent foreshadowing. Chopper's universal cure assumes a world where medicine travels freely, not one where entire islands are quarantined by tyrants. Jinbei's dream literally requires dismantling the caste system the world government is built on. These dreams are not a cozy B-plot. They are a revolution written in personal terms. And Robin, Frankie, and Nami are the skeleton key trio. Robin is the only person on that ship who can actually read the Poneglyphs, which means she's the one transforming mysterious rocks into a coherent history and a set of instructions. Frankie built the one ship on the planet that is intentionally designed, from Adam Wood up, to survive a round trip to Laugh Tale. Nami is the navigator who can thread that ship through the most hostile sea routes on Earth. That's not flavor. That's planned infrastructure. Without them, Luffy is just a very enthusiastic drowning victim with good branding. So when fans talk about Luffy finding the One Piece, they're missing the category difference. He's not a passenger stumbling onto a chest. He's the project manager of a multi-specialist crew whose combined dreams determine what that chest even does. Usopp's bravery turns into the courage to spread the truth. Brook's reunion with Laboon only works in a world where the seas are open and the promise Joy Boy failed to keep is finally completed. Luffy brings the will and the absurd, Nika-coded refusal to bow. But the crew brings the means, the logistics, the applied science of freedom. The One Piece's impact is a group project. And if that sounds grandiose, I need you to remember one more thing. Oda has already shown us a prototype crew that failed, because the Roger pirates had almost all these pieces, and still walked away saying they were too early. So what's the one thing Luffy's version has that Roger's didn't? From East Blue to Wano, a trail of unfinished promises. The one thing Roger's crew didn't have was time. They were the prototype party that showed up to the venue while the chairs were still being set up. And from that point on, Oda has been running the same experiment on smaller and smaller scales, conditioning you to recognize the pattern without you realizing it. Go back to East Blue. Those arcs are tutorial levels for inherited failure. Nami isn't just a navigator with a tragic backstory. She's the aftermath of Bellmare's impossible dream of giving her kids a normal life under a monster's thumb. Arlong wins. Bellmare dies. The map stays unfinished. Then Luffy walks in, plants his feet in Arlong Park, and finishes the chapter Bellmare started. He doesn't invent Nami's dream. He makes a world where it can exist without killing her. Same category, different flavor with Usopp. Kaya's future is being quietly stolen by Kuro, this bored sociopath who is literally rewriting her life for his retirement plan. Usopp's stories, Yasopp's absence, Kaya's dream of going to sea, those are all dangling threads from other people's failed responsibilities. Luffy shows up, calls the bluff, and hands Kaya a future where Usopp's lies have room to turn into real adventures. He does it again with Zoro. Queena's death leaves a dream with no body attached. Luffy recruits Zoro and, very bluntly, gives that dream a spine, a ship, and a route. Then Oda zooms out. Alabasta and Dressrosa are East Blue on nation mode. Crocodile and Doflamingo are warlords who hijack entire countries' futures and install themselves as the final chapter. The people's dreams, Vivi's for Alabasta, Riku's, and the toys for Dressrosa, are technically still there, but structurally impossible. Luffy doesn't create new ideals. He removes the parasite so the old dream can breathe again. The treasure he restores is the pre-existing trajectory that was interrupted. Here's the thing. Eni's lobby is where Oda stops being subtle and just slaps you. Robin's dream isn't world domination. It's to read history without being executed for it. The world government turns that dream into a death sentence, and Luffy's response is to literally declare war on the planet's operating system. That's not saving someone from a bad day. That's rewriting the rules so her dream fits in reality at all. Fast forward to Wano and Oden. Decades-old promise to open the borders. Decades-old failure. Generations living in the crater of a dead man's dream. Luffy arrives, beats Kaido, topples Orochi, and hands Momonosuke a country that can finally do the thing Oden died trying to start. Again, he didn't invent the goal. He wrote the last chapter. And no, this is not a coincidence. This is not a sin. This is intentional, planned storytelling. Oda keeps putting Luffy at the end of other people's stories. Noland, Joy Boy, Oden, Robin's mentors, and having him do the one thing they couldn't finish. You are being trained to see Luffy as the closer. The guy who shows up after the foreshadowing, after the tragedy, after the apology Poneglyph, and turns all that setup into payoff. Which is exactly the role he's going to play for Joy Boy, for Roger, and for the so-called One Piece. Because once you see that trail of unfinished promises, you have to ask, what's the biggest, oldest, most broken promise still waiting at the end of the sea? Joy Boy's treasure, more than a chest at the end of the map. So here's the thing. If you actually line up the crumbs Oda's dropped, Joy Boy's treasure stops looking like a chest and starts looking like a failed startup pitch for a new world. And I need you to sit with the failure part, because the manga will not shut up about it. Reconstruct the guy from the evidence. What do we know? There's an apology poneglyph under Fishman Island, explicitly tied to a promise to bring the island to the surface. There's Noah, a ship the size of a small country, waiting under that same island for the day of the promised time. There's the Void Century War against the ancestors of the world government. There's the repeated talk of a dawn that never came. You don't need to be a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast to notice the through line. Joy Boy was trying to unite races, drag the oppressed into the sun, and flip off the people who built the current system. That's not a weekend errand list. That's regime change. That's a planned, intentional world redesign that clearly did not get finished. And the apology text is your smoking gun. You don't apologize in stone because you miscounted the snacks. You apologize because the entire operation face-planted. So what was the treasure? I'm arguing it wasn't primarily an object, it was a plan. A set of tools, alliances, and mechanisms meant to reshape the world. Ancient weapons as geopolitical leverage, Noah as evacuation ark or migration vessel, Poneglyphs as an encrypted chain of custody for history and instructions, Laughtale itself as the control room where all those categories snap together into a single, horrifyingly ambitious blueprint. The problem is, the author of that blueprint died before he could run the program, which is why the physical leftovers feel so weird in isolation. Pluton exists, but hasn't fired. Poseidon is born again in Shirahoshi, but can't act yet. The Poneglyphs form a story, but only if some psycho actually gathers every stone. Roger gets to the final island, reads the script, and what does he say? We arrived too early. Translation. The hardware's there, the software's written, but the user it was designed for hasn't logged in. This is where the foreshadowing turns from lore dump into job posting. Joy Boy leaves a half-finished system. Roger confirms it, laughs, and kicks the can to the next era. The one piece in that frame is not a fully assembled prize. It's Joy Boy's half-finished blueprint for a free world, preserved in one place so someone else can finish it. And then Luffy shows up, which is a problem for the system in the best possible way. Because he doesn't just inherit tools and allies and the Nika body type DLC, he brings a completely stupid, beautiful dream that doesn't fit neatly into Joy Boy's original architecture. He doesn't care about ruling, or about balance of power, or any of the responsible things a revolutionary architect would plan for. His treasure is people, memories, freedom, and meat. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal for Luffy. So when he finally reaches that island, he's not just going to discover Joy Boy's plan. He's going to vandalize it, scribble in the margins, take the intentional design for a liberated world, and then, in pure Luffy fashion, break whatever still smells authoritarian. Which raises the real question we need to ask. What happens when an inherited blueprint for freedom collides with someone whose dream is even freer than the blueprint? Nika and the power of laughter. Why the ending has to be a joke. So when that inherited blueprint for freedom collides with Luffy, it doesn't just get followed, it gets memed. Weaponized joy. And to understand why that matters for the ending, we need to talk about Nika. Here's the thing, Nika is not just Sun God Power-Up DLC. In the story, Nika is a legendary figure of liberation, whispered about by slaves, associated with laughter, dancing, and the absurd idea that someone could turn a slave ship into a festival. That's the myth. A god who shows up, laughs in the face of oppression, and literally frees people with cartoon nonsense. And now, canonically, the fruit that embodies that myth is in Luffy's stomach. That means the warrior of liberation isn't a metaphor. It's a job description. It's planned into the setting. The author hard-coded a character whose power is to turn suffering into comedy without trivializing it. To make the oppressed laugh first and the oppressors crack last. This is not a sin. This is not bad tonal management. This is the exact storytelling tool you need for an ending that is both tragic and stupidly funny. Now take that Nika myth and overlay it on Roger at Laughtale. Roger reads the complete Void Century, sees Joy Boy's failure, understands the ancient weapons, realizes the world is built on an industrial-scale atrocity. And what does he do? He laughs. The crew laughs so hard, they rename the island Laughtale. That is not, ha-ha, genocide is hilarious. That is the laughter of people who have just seen the punchline to the cruelest joke in history. The The world is this broken, and the blueprint to fix it has been sitting in indestructible stone for 800 years. Roger calls himself too early, which is such a loaded, intentional phrase. He has the information, but he doesn't have Nika. He doesn't have the guy whose first instinct, when confronted with cosmic tragedy, is to go full Looney Tunes on God. Roger can read the joke. He can't perform it. And this is where Luffy stops being a treasure hunter and starts being the missing mechanic. The One Piece's ultimate activation is almost certainly not just opening a door or pressing an ancient weapon on switch. It's turning that tragic absurdity into a joyful, liberating act. Only someone who is literally joy-bringing and rule-breaking in his ontology would even think, what if we use the doomsday weapons to throw the biggest freedom party on the planet? Normal people do not get there. Pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast do not get there. Nika Luffy does. Oda has been foreshadowing that for decades in small, stupid moments. Luffy's laughter is contagious and world-changing. He laughs at Buggy and accidentally builds a future ally. He laughs with Vivi and turns a princess into a comrade. He laughs in Eni's lobby while declaring war on the world government, and you watch the tyrant's composure crack. Dressrosa, Whole Cake, Wano. His refusal to treat tyrants as serious, dignified villains is itself a weapon. So when he reaches Laugh Tale, I need you to understand. The creation of the One Piece is probably going to look less like a coronation and more like a prank. A world-scale joke at the world government's expense. A stunt so audacious that the celestial dragons stop being untouchable gods and start being the butt of the gag reel. The question is not whether Luffy will laugh. The question is what happens when the entire planet starts laughing with him, and what that does to a system built on fear. The final war. Using the One Piece versus owning it. So when that laughter stops being a meme and starts being a revolution, we hit the real question. When does the story actually cash that check? Because Oda has been whispering for years that the punchline and the apocalypse are scheduled for the same day. We have Whitebeard's dying words spelling it out. When someone finds that treasure, the whole world will be turned upside down. We have him promising a war that will engulf the entire world, that will make Marineford look like a warm-up scrimmage. Doflamingo echoes it. Roger's execution foreshadows it. Every prophet, drunk pirate, and cryptic legend keeps pointing to the same convergence. The treasure, the truth, and the greatest war the world has ever seen, all stacked on top of each other. Here's the thing. That only works if Luffy hits Laugh Tale before the war, not after. Structurally, narratively, in terms of basic writing craft, the author has to let the protagonist know what game he's playing before the final boss fight. You do not reveal the Void Century, the ancient weapons, the meaning of the D initial, and then cut to credits. You reveal them so the main character can weaponize that information. And this is not a sin. This is not some cheap shonen power-up. This is normal story architecture. Alabasta doesn't end with Vivi learning Crocodile's plan in the epilogue. She learns it in time to stop the bomb. Same category. Luffy and the Straw Hats reach Laugh Tale, read the completed Poneglyph script, discover what Joy Boy tried to do, and then they have to decide, what do we actually do with this? That's the pivot. The One Piece stops being a trophy and becomes a tool. Mid-climax, not post-climax. A mechanism Luffy uses to reshape the world order, rather than a medal he hangs in the Sunny's bathroom. What does using it even mean? Reasonable speculation time. You have a global network of indestructible history stones. You have a pirate with a Yonko-level megaphone. You have an era built on censorship and erased memory. Of course, one obvious use case is broadcasting the true history to the entire planet. Turn the Void Century from taboo into trending topic. The day the world government loses monopoly over the narrative is the day their power structure starts rotting in real time. But Oda has also been dangling harder, weirder options. Ancient weapons that can rule the seas. Noah and Joy Boy's apology to Fishman Island. Red line and calm belt geography that is comically artificial. You do not foreshadow a ship that moves nations, a weapon that shakes the world, and a promise to bring Fishman to the surface just so Luffy can put a crown on. You foreshadow a literal world edit, uniting the seas, breaking the red line, triggering a physical dawn. Listen to me. In every one of those scenarios, the crucial move is not discovering the One Piece. It is choosing what it means. Luffy is the one who decides whether that system becomes a guillotine, a broadcast tower, or a demolition charge for the old map. He is not a museum curator labeling Joy Boy's treasure. He is the co-author finishing Joy Boy's draft, turning One Piece from a noun into an event. And once you see that, you have to ask a scarier question. If the treasure is a tool, what kind of person is the world trusting to swing it? One Piece as a world-scale Skypiea bell. So here's my answer to that question. The world has accidentally handed the hammer to the one guy whose entire career is ringing metaphorical bells. We need to go back to Skypiea for a second. I need you to remember what that arc actually is in structural terms, not just the one everyone skips. You have Noland and Calgara's promise, an entire community calling Noland a liar for centuries, a bell that was supposed to prove the truth, and silence. The golden bell is physically there, it's massive, it's gorgeous, but until Luffy climbs a death pillar of clouds and punches it, it is functionally useless. It's a muted confession. Now scale that up. Imagine the One Piece as a world-scale golden bell. The sound isn't a literal gong. It's the broadcast of the void century, Joy Boy's dream, the real map of the world. For 800 years, that bell has existed in pieces, in stone, in weapons, in an island with a joke for a name. The problem isn't that the treasure doesn't exist. The problem is that no one has hit it hard enough for everyone to hear. Here's the thing. Oda has already built the bell structure in front of you. The Poneglyphs are the frame and the inscriptions, the metal body that defines what the sound will be. The ancient weapons are the acoustic system, the insane overkill PA speakers that can actually carry that sound across oceans. Laugh Tale is the belfry, the place where the whole mechanism finally comes together. And the One Piece itself, that's the clapper. That's the piece that has to swing at the exact right moment, in the exact right way, or all you've got is a very pretty, very silent monument to a failed revolution. Luffy's role, then, isn't museum visitor, it's bell ringer. He's not proving Noland right to one skeptical village. He's proving Joy Boy right to an entire planet that's been gaslit for 8 centuries. When he finds the One Piece, what he's actually doing is climbing up the world's neck and punching history so hard it resonates. And this is where Oda's real physical treasure comment stops being a gotcha and becomes part of the plan. A bell is physical. A clapper is physical. Gold is physical. But the value of that object is entirely dependent on someone choosing to ring it. Until then, it's scrap metal with lore. Once you categorize the One Piece as signal instead of stash, the whole Luffy creates it thing stops being a crack theory and starts being the only reading that respects the foreshadowing. The treasure exists, sure, but the event called One Piece only happens when Luffy swings that clapper and turns Joy Boy's unfinished draft into a world-shaking noise. Which raises the next problem. What does it actually mean, in concrete storytelling terms, to ring a bell that big? Why Luffy will just find it is a boring and wrong ending. So let's answer that, because I can already hear the most boring version of the theory typing in the comments. The simple ending goes like this. Luffy reaches Laugh Tale. There's a big pile of treasure, a neatly labelled Void Century Museum exhibit. The crew laughs, smash cut to credits. That's it. That's the story. On paper, this is fine. This is normal. It technically checks the boxes. The treasure is real, the mystery is solved, the promise from chapter 1 is fulfilled. But listen to me. After 30 years of weekly serialization and weaponized foreshadowing, that is not an ending. That's a guided tour. That's the author handing you a lore PDF and saying, thanks for reading. Here's the thing. One Piece has never treated knowledge as a collectible. Every time someone learns something important, the world shifts. O'Hara uncovers the Void Century and gets erased. Robin survives and suddenly the ancient texts are mobile. Even the Poneglyphs themselves aren't just backstory. They're instructions. They're a to-do list. Ending the series on, "We read the plaques and had a good chuckle," would be Oda throwing out his own rulebook. And that gets to the real problem with the passive ending crowd. In that version, Luffy is a tourist in Joy Boy's story. He's the guy who shows up to the last page of someone else's manga and goes, "Wow, crazy twist," then leaves. The whole inherited will motif? Reduced to cosplay. Roger explicitly says he was too early and leaves it to the next era. If Luffy just arrives, observes, and dies happy, he hasn't inherited anything. He's audited the past and refused to write the final chapter. We need to be honest about what that would do to the rest of the setup. The dawn of the world, the ancient weapons, Imu's God Mode oppression, Fishman Island's broken promise from Joy Boy. None of that is framed as trivia. Those are loaded guns on the mantle. They demand detonation. A static ending where the crew learns the truth and then goes home turns the entire final saga into a museum heist with extra steps. And yes, I get why fans reach for this. The community is terrified of a bad rewrite the world ending, so we overcorrect into no big changes, just vibes and treasure. This is not a sin. Wanting to protect a story you love is normal, but Oda has already promised a war surpassing Marineford, a global upheaval, a literal dawn. You do not foreshadow the sun rising for 1,000 chapters so your protagonist can watch a documentary and clock out. So could Oda write the "they find it and laugh" ending? Sure. He's the author. He can speedrun his own setup any time he wants, but everything intentional and planned in this narrative points the other way. Toward Luffy using whatever the One Piece actually is as a lever. Not just to admire Joy Boy's world, but to pull the trigger Joy Boy couldn't. The only real question is what that trigger does when it finally gets pulled, and who survives being in the blast radius. Fandom as pattern-seeking monkeys, reading too much and not enough. And this is where we have to talk about us, you, me, the community, because we are pattern-seeking monkeys who will see Jesus in toast and 4D chess in a coffee stain if you give us 2 panels and a red circle. We do this with One Piece constantly. We line up a random background NPC from chapter 73 with some silhouetted guy in 1040 and go, Oda planned this from day one. We see 3 circles and decide it's the ancient weapons sigil. We find a cloud that vaguely resembles Nika's hair and declare it intentional foreshadowing. And listen to me, this is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. Our brains are built to connect dots, even when the dots are just ink accidents. Here's the thing. When we treat every tiny coincidence as proof of a 30-year master spreadsheet, we end up over-crediting the wrong part of the craft and under-crediting the part that actually matters. We inflate foreshadowing into this mystical category where the author either planned every pebble on the beach in 1997 or they're a fraud. There's no room for Oda had a strong thematic spine and then played jazz on top of it, even though that's how a ton of great long-form storytelling works. Think about some of the wild theories you've seen. The ones where every panel is a cipher. The number of teeth in Luffy's gear. 5 grin matches the number of moons, proving the world is a simulation. Every time Zoro naps on the sunny, it's a map to Laugh Tale. I'm exaggerating, but not by much. The problem isn't having fun theories. The problem is when we put those in the same category as the very real, very grounded patterns we've been tracing. Inherited will, unfinished promises, Joy Boy's failure echoing through Fishman Island, Roger literally saying they came too early. Pattern interrupt. What if the One Piece has not been a single fixed answer in Oda's head since chapter 1? What if that obsession is actually making you miss the flex? Insisting that the treasure is a perfectly frozen concept from the first storyboard draft is just another version of seeing Jesus in toast. It turns Oda into a time-traveling spreadsheet and erases the visible evolution of his own ideas. It also makes it harder to appreciate what he's really doing with Luffy, creating the One Piece. Taking a planned endpoint, Joy Boy's dream, the Void Century, the Dawn, and refining how to express it as his characters and themes deepen. I need you to let go of the purity test. We need to stop grading the ending on whether it matches a 20-year-old headcanon or a Reddit theory from Marineford. The healthier move is to appreciate the mix of planning and improvisation. Did the payoff honor the setup we can actually prove? Did it resolve the inherited wills on the table? Did it use the ancient weapons and the final war to say something coherent about freedom? Because the real question isn't, was this in Oda's notebook in 1996? It's, does the way Luffy finishes this promise feel inevitable now that we've walked the whole journey? And that's where we're headed next. Oda's real superpower, flexibility, not omniscience. So if inevitability is the metric, we need to talk about the guy actually steering the ship, not Luffy, Oda. Because there's this myth in the community that Oda is an omniscient god who wrote the last panel in 1996 and has just been cosplaying suspense ever since. Listen to me. That version of Oda doesn't exist. The real version is way scarier. A guy who pre-wrote the spine, then kept mutating the body around it for 30 years without snapping the backbone. Here's the thing. Oda has flat out admitted to changing course. Vivi was supposed to be a throwaway Baroque Works villain. Then she accidentally became the emotional core of Alabasta and a prototype for allies who don't join the crew. Lore? Initially, a cool supernova garnish. Then Oda realized the story needed a surgeon to literally and thematically cut open the world government, and suddenly Lore is a co-protagonist for a decade. Enies Lobby was meant to be shorter. Marineford ballooned. Wano was planned for way earlier, then kept getting delayed because he had to introduce the Shichibukai, the supernovas, the revolutionaries, the celestial dragon's whole torture zoo. This is not a sin. This is normal in long-form writing. The difference is that most authors cannot keep that level of improvisation tethered to an intentional endgame. And this is where the Oda planned everything meme actually undersells his genius. Rigidly sticking to a 20-year-old outline is easy. You just follow the recipe, even if the ingredients went bad. What Oda is doing is cooking while the kitchen is on fire, the menu keeps expanding, and the restaurant is booked out for 5 years, and somehow the courses still arrive in the right order. Nika is the cleanest example. The sun god imagery, the drums, the slave rebellions, the Skypiea lore. Those motifs are seeded early. But the explicit Nika reveal lands deep into the series after Oda has already spent years foregrounding the celestial dragon's cruelty and the revolutionary army's growth. Does that mean Nika was a last-minute gag? No. It means the exact form of the payoff evolved to absorb new thematic weight. Same with the One Piece itself. You can feel the treasure's design stretching to contain new priorities. Joy Boy's failed apology, Poseidon and the Sea Kings, the too early tragedy of Roger, the very public spectacle of Luffy's Gear 5 Joy. The endpoint keeps getting richer because the world around it keeps getting uglier and more complicated. I need you to see how this feeds our thesis. If the story is a living organism, then the One Piece is not a static chest waiting patiently at the finish line. It's the final shape that organism grows into. Luffy creating it isn't fanfic. It's the natural consequence of an author who keeps re-aiming his themes toward freedom, laughter, and shared history as the series ages. And no, this doesn't cheapen the ending. This is fine. A responsive ending is not a cop-out. It's an ending that listened to 25 years of its own heartbeat. The question isn't, did Oda know the exact gag on the last page in 1997? The question is, did he build a machine sturdy enough that, when Luffy hits the last island, every moving part can snap into place and say something true about who he has become? Which means we now have to ask, what does that machine actually need to say when Luffy finally stands where Roger stood and laughs? Rebuilding our definition of One Piece from the ground up. So when Roger stands there, reads the final Poneglyphs, sees Joy Boy's prank from 800 years ago, and just bursts out laughing, what is that machine actually saying? What is so funny about reaching the peak of the world and realizing you're early? We need to rebuild this from the ground up, not as pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in every panel border, but as people actually reading what the author pinned down. Oda has nailed a few constraints to the wall. The One Piece is real and physical. He has said that outright. It's tied to history, Void Century records, Joy Boy's apology, ancient weapons, all engraved in stone. It's connected to Joy Boy specifically. And crucially, Roger found it, understood it, and still went, yeah, this isn't for me. We're too early. That's our hard evidence box. Now stack the narrative pattern box on top of that. This story is haunted by unfinished promises. Noland and Calgara, Joy Boy and Fishman Island, Laboon and Brook. Every time Luffy shows up as the Chaos Gremlin who finishes a dead guy's side quest. He rings the bell. He brings the musician home, he punches the god, he forces the apology to finally land. In this storytelling ecosystem, treasure is never inert. Treasure is action-dependent. The gold in Skypiea doesn't matter until he turns it into a bell ringing across the world. Thriller Bark's loot is meaningless compared to the scars Zoro takes on. Treasure keeps being redefined as what you do with the thing, not the thing. Here's the thing. That's not random theming, that's foreshadowing of category. Oda is teaching you how to read the final chest, and when you fold in the pre-writing model we talked about, it gets worse in the best way. If Oda knew the endgame before Chapter 1, he didn't just write, there is a treasure. He planned a world-scale tool or mechanism at the end of the map, and then delayed deciding the exact way it's used until Luffy's character and dream had fully crystallized in serialization. The setup is a socket. The payoff is whatever plug Luffy grows into. So here's a working definition I need you to hold. The One Piece is Joy Boy's incomplete mechanism for reshaping the world into one piece, united and free, that only becomes what it's meant to be when Luffy uses it to fulfill his hidden dream. Not treasure that grants a wish in the vague sense, but a concrete physical apparatus plus a missing variable, the user's will. Roger could see the blueprint, he could read the instructions, but his era, his allies, his own dream, wrong shape for the keyhole. Which means when we talk about the ending, we don't actually have to guess whether it's a ship, a weapon, a record, a switch. This is not a sin, this is fine, this is normal for long-form writing. We focus on the creative act. How does Luffy, the guy who keeps turning other people's regrets into completed stories, pick this thing up and finish Joy Boys? Because once you accept that definition, the real question stops being, what is the One Piece? And turns into something much more dangerous. What does Luffy have to do in that final moment to make the whole world laugh with him? So what does Luffy actually do at Laugh Tale? So let's actually walk it through. Not the meme version where Luffy opens a chest and it's the friends we made along the way, but a concrete, canon-respecting sequence of events. I need you to picture this as an author who has been pre-writing the ending for 25 years, because that's the only way this scale of payoff works. They hit Laugh Tale after doing the one thing Roger's crew couldn't, collecting every road poneglyph, every history stone, every ally. Robin isn't piecing together fragments anymore. She's holding the completed script of the Void Century, the truth about Joy Boy's failure, the ancient weapons, the apology to Fishman Island, the reason the world government buried it all. It's finally laid out, intentionally in order, and in the middle of that, there is a treasure. Oda has sworn to us it's real and physical. So sure, maybe it's an island-spanning device, or a literal mechanism tied to the ancient weapons, or a map of how to rearrange the seas. The exact category doesn't matter yet. What matters is that it's clearly unfinished. You can see the foreshadowing echo of Skypiea here. Joy Boy is Noland, the world is Calgara, and the bell hasn't been rung. Here's the thing. Luffy's first reaction is still laughter. It has to be. That's the inherited will beat. He's Joy Boy's successor. He's Roger's chosen one. He's the same pattern-seeking monkey who can see freedom in a piece of fruit the government labeled a failure. He laughs because the story is absurd, because the world government has been trying to erase a prank on a planetary scale. The crew laughs with him, each for their own reason. But then we hit the crucial difference. Roger was too early. He reads the script, sees the machine, realizes he doesn't have Poseidon awakened, doesn't have a world ready to revolt, doesn't have a Nika fruit user whose very existence is a global broadcast. So he leaves. He literally says, "We arrived too early." Luffy does not have that problem. By the time he stands there, Shirahoshi is Poseidon. Pluton and Uranus are on the board. The Sabo/Luffy/Dragon axis has lit a revolutionary fuse. The world is on the brink of change, and the ancient weapons are no longer theoretical nukes. They are Chekhov's guns the author has been polishing for 1,000 chapters. So the key moment is not discovery, the key moment is decision. What does Luffy do with a treasure that can rewrite geography, topple political structures, or literally let the drowned voices of history speak to everyone at once? We need to stop treating this as a lore dump and start treating it as a character choice. Pattern interrupt. Nothing says he has to use it the way Joy Boy intended. Listen to me. That's where he creates the One Piece. He takes Joy Boy's half-finished plan and slams it into his own censored dream and his crew's dreams. Maybe he uses the ancient weapons to shatter the red line and merge the seas, ending Fishman discrimination in one visible, irreversible act. Maybe he triggers a global broadcast of the true history, weaponizing communication instead of annihilation. Whatever the exact mechanism, the important part is that the treasure becomes the moment the world cannot go back. At that point, the identity of the One Piece matters less than the posture Luffy takes in front of it. The chest, the device, the weapon, the archive, that's just the gun on the mantle. The story doesn't fire until Luffy pulls the trigger in his own deeply stupid, deeply sincere way. This is not a sin. This is not a cop-out. This is exactly how Oda has been writing Inherited Will from Chapter 1. The previous generation sets the stage. The next one decides what the stage is for. And once you accept that, you can see the next problem coming a mile away. If Luffy's choice is what makes the One Piece real, then the real final battle isn't over the treasure at all. It's over who gets to shape the world that comes after he uses it. The world after. What a completed One Piece looks like. So what does that world actually look like when someone wins that fight? I need you to picture this with me, because this is where the title One Piece stops being a mystery and starts being a map. First, the seas themselves change. Not metaphorically, I mean the actual ocean stops being this four-way prison cell. The calm belt, the red line, the Grand Line currents, those are not random weather problems. They're hardware, intentionally installed by the world government and the ancient weapons to keep humanity chopped into neat, controllable regions. A completed One Piece world is one where that hardware has been ripped out and re-engineered. The seas connect, routes open. You don't need a death wish and a log pose just to visit your cousins. Second, the truth isn't contraband anymore. The Void Century, Joy Boy's failure, the origins of the Celestial Dragons, Robin's entire field of study, goes from banned PDF on a dark web server to required reading in middle school. Robin isn't whispering history in the shadows. She's a professor on a public stage, publishing the full Poneglyph record without a death sentence attached. This is not a sin. This is not bad world building. This is literally the payoff foreshadowed every time the government freaks out over one archaeologist with a notebook. And because that truth is public, the government either reforms under that pressure or it cracks. Enies Lobby, O'Hara, God Valley, those stop being rumours and become court cases. Fishmen don't need a bubble to visit the surface. Jinbei's dream cashes out as Fishman Island physically moving, probably to that giant straw-hatted egghead of a hole under the red line, and his people walking under the same sun Nika dances under. Formerly non-human races aren't mascots in a reverie parade, they're neighbours. Here's the thing, in that world, every Straw Hat's so-called side quest suddenly clicks into place. Nami's world map. For the first time, it's not a theoretical diagram of seas that can't be crossed. It's a navigational tool for a globe that is actually traversable by normal people. Sanji's All Blue stops being a foodie cryptid and starts being basic oceanography. Once the barriers drop and currents stabilize, of course, all four seas mix. Usopp's stories are no longer lies that might be foreshadowing. They're a travel brochure. And sitting at the center of all that is the One Piece itself. But notice what's happened. It's no longer a community obsession, a Reddit thread, a mystery box. It's a museum piece. A historical artifact you can point to and say, that's what Luffy used, physically, symbolically, politically, to shove the world into one piece. Whatever it was before, it's now a category error to talk about it without talking about him. Which means retroactively, the treasure's true nature is defined by the outcome. Joy Boy's failed promise becomes Luffy's completed legacy. The gun on the mantle was always there, sure, but it only becomes important when he pulls the trigger and the seas unite. And once you see that, you can feel the last unresolved question humming under everything. What does he actually have to do, concretely, to flip the world from the old configuration into the new one? Why this reading makes Oda's promise stronger, not weaker. So here's where a lot of the community short-circuits and accuses this whole thing of being copium. If Luffy creates the One Piece, isn't that just the real treasure was the friends we made along the way with extra steps? No. Listen to me. That reading only exists if you ignore the one hard line Oda has drawn in the sand for 25 years. Oda has been absurdly clear. The One Piece is real. It's not a metaphor. It's not vibes. It's not, your memories are the treasure. He has literally said he hates that kind of ending. So, we need to build a theory that takes that author statement seriously, not one that politely shoves it under the rug and hopes no one notices. Here's the thing. Luffy creates the One Piece does not mean there was nothing there. It means the treasure at Laugh Tale is a physical, intentional setup. An object or set of objects, a recorded history, a mechanism, a weapon, a stage. The difference is that its final meaning, its world-shaking impact, only snaps into place when Luffy actually uses it. The gun is still on the mantle. The gun is real metal. The trigger pull just hasn't happened yet. Think about the Poneglyphs. They're not a scrapbook of fun facts. They're a coordinated information weapon, scattered across the seas, pointing you toward Laugh Tale, the ancient weapons, and the Void Century. Joy Boy's apology to Fishman Island? That's not a Hallmark card. That's a receipt for an unpaid promise involving Poseidon and the surface. This theory says all of that history, all of those weapons, all of that global politics foreshadowing cash out in one concrete sequence of actions only Luffy can perform. Fans sometimes want the Roger laugh because it was a giant joke answer, because it feels simple, clean category. But that's actually the easy way out for Oda. Reveal a wacky island, pan over some treasure, roll credits. This is fine for a shorter story. For One Piece, that would be Oda sprinting the last lap after running a marathon in full armor just to collapse at the finish line. If the treasure is real and incomplete, though, the burden on the ending skyrockets. Oda doesn't just have to show you a cool vault. He has to orchestrate a final war where Luffy activates that vault, deploys, or rejects ancient weapons, exposes the Void Century, topples the world government, and triggers the dawn of the world, in a way that feels both inevitable and earned. That is brutally hard writing. This is not a sin. This is the most demanding version of the promise. And it fits his track record. Every big moment in this story has been, oh, you thought we were done, turned up to 11. Marineford wasn't just Ace dying. It was the entire power structure recontextualized. Wano wasn't just samurai cosplay. It was Joy Boy, Nika, and 20 years of foreshadowing detonating at once. So I need you to ask yourself, is Oda really going to let the final mystery be smaller than Marineford? Or is he quietly setting up something even nastier than all of that combined? Because once you accept that the One Piece is real, incomplete, and waiting specifically for Luffy's hand on the switch, a new, much scarier question appears. What kind of mechanism has been sitting under the world for 800 years? And what happens to everyone when it finally turns on? How to watch the remaining chapters without losing your mind. So here's the thing. If you try to white-knuckle your way through the final saga, treating every chapter like a crime scene, you are going to lose your mind. I need you to stop reading One Piece as a scavenger hunt for what object is the One Piece, and start reading it as how is Oda building the conditions where Luffy can finish the One Piece. That tiny shift will save your sanity. Focus less on guessing the exact physical form. Gold? A ship? A hard drive with Vegapunk's Spotify? Wrong category. The useful question week to week is, whose relationship just moved? Which ally just got positioned on the board? How did Luffy's dream get restated or challenged? When Roger says they were too early, that's not trivia, that's the author underlining. The treasure exists, but the world around it wasn't ready. Your job as a reader now is to watch the world getting ready. That means tracking patterns, not pixels. We need to be a little less pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast because a rock in the background has 4 dots, and a little more, why does Oda keep censoring this one sentence about Luffy's dream? Pay attention to the unfinished promises. Joy Boy's apology to Fishman Island, Nika's absent era of freedom, Roger laughing at a story he can't complete. Pay attention to repeated motifs, dawn, inherited will, people laughing at the end of their journey. Those are intentional signals. The random barrel in panel 3 is probably just a barrel. Here's a practical tool. Every time a new clue drops, run it through the foreshadowing / retrofitting / pre-writing filter. Ask, is this a hard commitment the author is staking the ending on? Pre-written core, like the Poneglyph history. Is this flexible foreshadowing that can bend a little? A motif? A running gag? A vague prophecy? Or is this a retrofit, where Oda is cleverly tying some old gag into the current plot? Kinemon's dragon, anyone? This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is normal, and it helps you sort what actually matters for predicting Luffy's role in creating the treasure. And while we're here, we need to talk about absolutist language in the community. Oda definitely planned this in 1997. If the One Piece isn't X, it's bad writing. No, you don't know his notebooks, and you are handcuffing your own enjoyment. Say, this feels pre-written, or I prefer if it's more material / more thematic. You're allowed preferences. You're not the Supreme Court of foreshadowing. Listen to me. The remaining chapters are not a quiz you can fail. They're a chance to watch an ending being constructed in real time. Every time Luffy turns enemies into allies, every time the ancient weapons and the dawn get threaded back into Joy Boy's failure, you're watching the empty slot in the One Piece slowly fill in. Treat each chapter as another piece of the mechanism snapping into place, and by the time Luffy stands on that final island, you won't just find the One Piece with him, you'll understand how he helped create it. And if that sounds abstract, good, because the next step is to pin down what Luffy creating the One Piece actually looks like on the page. Recap, from static treasure to completed promise. So let's zoom out for a second, because I need you to see the whole shape of what we've been doing here. From the very start, the problem has been that the community treats the One Piece as a static chest at the end of a dungeon. You beat the final boss, you open the loot box, credits roll. That model feels intuitive. It's also completely incompatible with Roger saying he was too early and Oda dangling this whole dawn of the world thing in front of you for 1,000 chapters. If the treasure is just sitting there, finished, Roger wasn't too early. He was on time. He got it. End of story. The only way his line makes any sense is if the One Piece is bound to a specific era and a specific action. Not just who finds it, but who can actually use it. That's been the spine of the argument. We need to stop treating the One Piece as a static object and start reading it as a planned, era-dependent mechanism. To get there, we built that 3-part framework: foreshadowing, retrofitting, pre-writing. Foreshadowing is the intentional seed for a known payoff. Retrofitting is the author going back and stapling new meaning onto old material. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is normal. But the One Piece itself? That lives in pre-writing. It's part of the small, sacred category of decisions Oda locked in before Chapter 1, then revealed out of order. He's not inventing the treasure on the fly. He's slowly walking you toward a payoff that was structurally baked in from the beginning. And the evidence has never been, Oda is a magic genius, praise be. It's concrete. Joy Boy's apology to Fishman Island is literally a narrative sticky note. Hey, someone in the future needs to finish this promise. The Skypiea bell is a giant metal metaphor for Luffy's role in the story. He doesn't discover some new truth, he rings an old one loud enough that it finally reaches the right ears. Fishman Island's prophecy, the Poneglyph network, the ancient weapons, all say the same thing in different fonts. The past left behind instructions, not a finished product. And who is the one character whose whole deal is picking up abandoned dreams and ramming them across the finish line through sheer stupidity and stubbornness? It's Luffy. Laboon and Brook, Noland and Calgara, Otohime and Fisher Tiger. Over and over, he walks into half-complete stories and brute forces them into completion. That's not a coincidence. That's the author training you for what he's going to do with Joy Boy. So here's the thing. When I say Luffy won't find the One Piece, he'll create it. I'm not saying the treasure isn't real. Oda has been clear. It's physical. You can touch it. What I'm saying is that it only becomes the One Piece in the full planned sense when Luffy uses it to finish Joy Boy's plan, reveal his own hidden dream, and trigger the dawn Roger couldn't reach. Until then, it's an incomplete promise. Which is why I need you to start running a mental patch on your own brain. Anytime you catch yourself asking, what is the One Piece? I want you to swap in, what will Luffy do with the One Piece? That single substitution will clean up so many nonsense theories you'd think you just deleted half your browser history. Because once you read the treasure as a tool, not a trophy, a lot of those weird dangling mysteries, the dawn, the ancient weapons, the final war, suddenly stop being trivia and start looking intentional. And the next step is to drill into that question directly. Given everything we know, what can Luffy actually do with the One Piece when he finally gets there? What this changes about how we talk about One Piece online. So if the treasure is a tool, not a trophy, then we need to talk about how we, as a community, keep treating theories like blood types. You don't just think the One Piece is an ancient spaceship. You are a spaceship truther. Your entire online personality becomes Guy who called it in 2014. And then, when Oda does something different, it's not, oh, interesting author choice. It's a personal attack on your brand. Here's the thing. This is not a sin. Getting attached to ideas is normal. I do it. You do it. Every pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast does it. The problem is when I had a cool thought mutates into I must defend this as canon or I lose. That's when you get people dunking on others for wrong guesses or pulling out Oda is a genius, he would never do that as a cudgel instead of an argument. Oda's supposed omniscience becomes a weapon instead of a compliment. I need you to retire the image of Oda as a flawless 4D chess god who planned every eyebrow hair from Chapter 1. Assume he's what the evidence actually shows. A brilliant but human storyteller, with a heavily pre-written endgame and a ton of flexibility in the middle. Once you do that, the criteria for good theory shifts. It stops being who said it first and becomes which idea best fits the themes, foreshadowing patterns, and the kind of ending this author has been building toward. Not, did I win the prediction lottery, but does this feel intentional in his style of writing? And we can make that a lot easier on ourselves by just tagging what we're doing. This is fine, this is normal. Say, this is a vibes theory when you're just chasing emotional resonance. Say, this is based on explicit foreshadowing when you're pointing to specific panels and interviews. Say, this is pre-writing style speculation when you're trying to reverse engineer the blueprint. Suddenly, half the pointless fights vanish because you're not arguing across categories without realizing it. Seen through the Luffy creates the One Piece lens, even the core debate changes. Instead of screaming it's a weapon versus it's a Rio Poneglyph versus it's a giant party, you start asking, which version actually requires Luffy to do something? Which object or structure or system leads to the most satisfying, Luffy-driven act of creation at the end? Which theory lets him finish Joy Boy's promise, trigger the dawn, and still feel earned by the story's existing setups? And once you're asking that, the whole experience gets better. Less stress over being right. More appreciation for how Oda sticks the landing on the promises he's actually made, instead of the ones we invented. You get to enjoy the ride, watch the pre-writing snap into place, and then be pleasantly surprised when he threads the needle in a way none of us quite saw coming. Because the real question isn't, what is the One Piece? It's what does Luffy have to build so that when we see it, we go, oh, of course. And to answer that, we need to go deeper into what the story has already told us about Joy Boy's failure, Roger's laughter, and the one thing Luffy has that they never did. Your turn. Pick a side and defend it in the comments. So here's where I stop theory dumping at you and start handing you the wheel. You've heard my argument. You've seen the receipts. Now I need you to plant your flag. In your head, is the One Piece already sitting there on Laugh Tale, fully formed, just waiting for Luffy to show up and go, wow, neat? Or is it an unfinished thing that only becomes the One Piece when Luffy activates it, completes it, or redefines what it means for the entire world? I'm not asking which you think is cooler. I'm asking which version actually fits the foreshadowing, the author interviews, the way this story has been planned. Are you Team Static Treasure? Roger laughed because he saw a perfect punchline, end of story. Or Team Completed Promise? Roger laughed because he realized he was too early, that someone else had to finish the joke. When you comment, don't just say Team Static or Team Promise and dip. That's Twitter behavior. We need you to build a case. Tell me which piece of evidence from this video hit you hardest, or which one you think I'm completely misreading. Was it Roger literally saying he came too early? Was it the Joy Boy apology to Fishman Island? Was it the Skypiea bell ringing as a completed promise parallel? Or are you sitting there going, no, you pattern-seeking monkey, that's just coincidence. And you've got a panel from Water 7 or Wano you think proves it? Here's the thing. If you're going to say, Oda didn't plan that, I want to see the chapter, the SBS, the example. Put the theory in one category or another. Call out where you think it's foreshadowing, where it's retrofitting, where it's just us seeing Jesus in toast because the community is bored between chapters. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how fans engage with long-form storytelling without turning our brains off. And then there's Luffy's censored dream. I need you to go on record. What do you think he actually said? What single sentence could connect Shanks crying, Sabo's shock, and Roger's crew laughing, and still intersect with the One Piece and the dawn of the world at Laugh Tale? Drop your version of the dream, and then explain how that dream either discovers a finished treasure, or literally creates the condition where that treasure finally means something. Format it however you want. But if you're stuck, do this. Start your comment with Team Static Treasure or Team Completed Promise. Then give me one supporting arc, one specific panel, and your version of Luffy's dream. That's it. 3 moves. Anyone can respond to that without it turning into a flame war, because we're arguing evidence and writing, not IQ scores. Remember, the goal isn't to be right before Oda flips the lights on. The goal is to train ourselves to read what's actually on the page, to respect how intentional this story is, and to stop forcing it into a simpler shape just because our brains are allergic to uncertainty. And once you've picked a side, we can finally talk about what Joy Boy, Roger, and Luffy are all trying and failing to build. Final word on Luffy, creation, and the end of the Grand Line. So here's where we need to land this. We've spent all this time arguing about categories and clues and whether Oda pre-wrote the ending, but at the center of that giant conspiracy corkboard is still one very stupid boy in a straw hat. Luffy is not a genius tactician. He is not a master historian. He is a reckless idiot with a terrifyingly pure sense of freedom, and the entire story is what happens when you drop that personality into other people's tragedies. Islands where promises broke, kingdoms where dreams stalled, and every time, he doesn't solve the problem by understanding the law. He kicks the law in the teeth and turns it into a new beginning. Listen to me. That's the pattern. Alabaster's civil war, Skypiea's 400-year grudge, Eni's lobby's government trauma, Fishman Island's racism, Wano's national captivity. The foreshadowing isn't just in symbols and panels. It's in the way this author keeps using Luffy as a reset button on dead futures. He hears a story that ended in failure. He screams, "That sucks," and then he forces it to keep going. So of course he's the one who inherits Joy Boy's apology. Of course he's the one Roger was too early to be. Roger found the archive of a failed dream and laughed because he understood the joke. This was an ending that needed a different main character. The problem wasn't the device or the document or the ancient city. The problem was the era. Here's the thing. Whatever the One Piece turns out to be on paper, a machine, a blueprint, a whole island-sized prank, it's already been foreshadowed that the object itself is not the point. The Poneglyphs are an incomplete history. The ancient weapons are inert until someone chooses what they're for. Joy Boy's promise to Fishman Island is just words until someone drags a sun into their sky. The treasure is a tool, and tools only matter in the hands of a user. Which means the real ending question isn't what is the One Piece, it's what does Luffy do with it? Does he fire the gun or melt it down into playground equipment? Does he push an ancient button or ignore it and use the platform as a stage to announce a new world? Whatever Oda has planned, if it feels like Luffy actively creating a future instead of passively inheriting someone else's blueprint, then the promise of this whole absurd marathon holds. And I need you to notice, that's our job too. We've been reading, arguing, overanalyzing panels as if we're pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast. But this is not a sin. This is normal. This is the community doing with the story what Luffy does with the past, refusing to let it be finished without us. So when we finally reach that last island, it won't just be Oda ending a manga. It'll be you and me, co-readers who spent decades of real human time on this, helping create the One Piece by deciding what it means. And then, once we've done that, we can talk about the only remaining question. What happens to a world after the punchline lands? Stay till the end of the world. What to watch next? And here's the thing. That's us now. We opened this video with me yelling that we, as a community, had lost the plot. We were mashing panels together on Twitter, screaming foreshadowing at every cloud that vaguely resembled a straw hat, and calling it analysis. But if you're still here, you've done the opposite. You slowed down. You separated categories. You started asking, what did this author actually plan? And what are we just projecting as pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast? That's the difference. Early on it was Luffy finds treasure, the end. Now it's Luffy helps create the meaning of the treasure through what he does at the end of the world. That is a more precise, more demanding way of thinking about One Piece, and I need you to hold on to that as we sail to the next island, because we're not done. Not even close. If this video was the big picture map, the next stop is drilling into one specific log pose, Joy Boy. The whole Luffy won't find the One Piece, he'll create it. Argument collapses if Joy Boy isn't a planned, intentional through line from the Void Century to Roger to Luffy. So the follow-up I want you to watch next is my Joy Boy deep dive. The one where we go panel by panel through Skypiea, Fishman Island and Wano and ask, which moments are true foreshadowing, which are retrofits, and which are just thematic echoes we've overhyped. If you've ever wondered whether Roger's "we were too early" line was set in stone from the start, or upgraded later to fit the endgame, that's the video that tries to answer it. If you've ever stared at the Noland and Calgera story and felt your brain whisper, "This is Joy Boy in miniature," We need to talk about that explicitly with receipts. Now, if you made it this far into this one, you are not a casual viewer. You are part of the endurance crew, so do me a favor. Go to the comments and actually say endurance crew reporting in or some variation your sleep-deprived brain comes up with. This is not a sin. This is not cringe. This is, in fact, how we find the other people who also just spent an embarrassing chunk of adult life on a video about hypothetical pirate economics and metaphysical treasure categories. Because remember, the story is still unfolding. Oda is still dropping new Poneglyphs, new Joy Boy hints, new panels that might force us to go, okay, that earlier foreshadowing example, that was cope. This new one is the real thing. This channel is basically a logbook for that process, a place where we update the theory every time a new chapter either supports it or kicks it in the teeth. So here's the plan. Hit the Joy Boy video next. Sub if you want to keep sailing with us. Drop your endurance crew tag so I know who's still on deck. And then we can all go back to doing the most normal thing in the world. Spending years of our finite existence arguing about whether a cartoon rubber man is going to invent a fictional treasure. This is fine. This is normal. Cut.